Prologue. It's late at night. The main character is in the castle of the Archduke, whose name is Raphael Astrid Ludovica. The girl is awake. She watches the Archduke sleeping next to her. The main character, unwilling to sleep, listens to the aristocrat's breathing. Archduke Raphael is a very handsome figure. Astrid Ludovica admires the aristocrat's handsome features, which remind her of an antique statue. The girl thinks that the man sleeping next to her is the emperor's nephew, a war hero and the only blade master on the continent who leads the Order of the Black Dragons. The main character decides to get out of bed, but she finds it difficult because the sleeping aristocrat is hugging her. She has to stroke the Archduke to keep him from waking up. A few moments later, the heroine almost managed to escape the sleeping aristocrat's embrace, but suddenly, in her sleep, the Archduke grabbed the girl by the hair. This caused her great discomfort. The main character, whose name is Charlotte Bravant, realized that the man, with his awkward movement, tore off her wig, which she used to pretend to be someone else. Today, the girl intends to secretly leave the Order of the Black Dragon and its leader. The protagonist turned to look at the handsome aristocrat one last time and declared that she would never see him again. After this, Charlotte Bravant jumped from the balcony and headed away from the ducal palace. Meanwhile, the aristocrat heard a noise and woke up. He watched the fleeing girl. The Archduke overheard the main character's parting words, saying they would never see each other again. The aristocrat doubts this and is ready to prove it in action. The main character is the heiress of the glorious county of Brabant, which rendered many useful services to the imperial family and brought benefit to its state. The noble Bravant family raised two daughters. One of them was named Grace. She was destined to inherit the count's illustrious name and assume responsibility for the family's future. The youngest daughter of Count Bravant, whose name is Charlotte, is distinguished by her freedom-loving character and masterful swordsmanship, demonstrating excellent results in the art of fencing. The girls lost their mother early in life, as she died, but Count Bravant proved himself a loving father and provided his daughters with an excellent upbringing. Charlotte Bravant grew up among people who loved her dearly. The girl thought her happiness would last forever, but life, unfortunately, is full of pain, tears, and misfortunes. All these troubles did not pass the young countess by. When the main character was 13, Count Bravant died. The girl and her sister were beside themselves with grief. It was especially hard for the unfortunate Charlotte, who loved her father dearly. But the most terrifying thing for the girl was the realization, against the backdrop of severe shock, that she was in a fictional world, and this story would end with the death of her beloved sister, Grace Bravant. In a past life, Charlotte read a novel called The Rose of Bravant. Grace is the main character in this romantic story, in which she falls in love with a knight named Ethan. In this novel, Grace Bravant marries an unloved man who is a cruel tyrant in order to save her family from bankruptcy after the death of Count Bravant. The unfortunate knight Ethan is too poor and not powerful enough to influence his beloved's decision, which deeply disappoints him. Following these events, the noble youth sets out on a long and dangerous journey. Ethan wanted to achieve success and fame, to enhance his status, and win back his girlfriend. But this adventure ended with the young man dead, and his beloved left inconsolable. Out of grief and longing for her deceased lover, Grace Bravant decided to voluntarily leave this life in order to follow Ethan and always be with him, but in another world. But for now, Grace is still alive. She hugs her younger sister Charlotte tightly at their father's funeral and tries to comfort her, telling her that everything will be okay. The protagonist also hugs her older sister. She realizes she must act immediately to avoid losing the last loved one, still alive and by her side. Charlotte Bravant will change the plot of this fantastical story she's currently experiencing and save her sister from death. 4 years have passed. Charlotte has matured and become a master fencing artist, but she hasn't yet been able to change the plot of Rose Bravant's novel. This means the protagonist's sister remains in constant danger. The girl tried to warn her sister about the danger she faced, but Grace didn't believe her. The main character also tried to become financially independent, but she also failed in this. Charlotte Bravant is acutely aware of this right now and is venting her frustration during training. Her friend, John Albrecht, approached her. This noble youth is the protagonist's childhood friend. His father holds the title of Marquis and baptized Charlotte Bravant as an infant at the Count's request. The godfather taught his son and the protagonist the art of fencing. John Albrecht asked Charlotte how she was doing and how she was feeling. She stopped her workout and said she was doing great. The young Marquis hastened to inform his friend that her sister was soon to marry Duke Herman. This news greatly upset the protagonist. Charlotte Bravant was so excited when she heard the news that she grabbed her companion's hands. She asked the Marquis how he knew Grace was getting married. The young countess can't believe that the original story's plot is coming true. All her efforts to change the plot of Rose Bravant's novel have been in vain. Enraged and frightened, the girl drew her sword and declared that she had only one way out of this situation. She must kill Duke Herman to prevent her sister Grace from marrying him. The young Marquis overheard his friend's words and took the blade from her, lest she do anything foolish. John Albrecht's father hadn't taught Charlotte the art of fencing for that reason. The young man hastened to reassure the countess. He returned the blade to her and said that his family also did not want Grace to marry the old and lustful Duke Herman, who was already 80 years old. Moreover, this old nobleman is the emperor's father-in-law. This could have undesirable consequences for Grace Bravant and her sister. The main character decided to stretch her back a bit after a tough workout and some bad news. She stretched and said she didn't care who her sister married. For Charlotte Bravant, the most important thing is that her sister is happy. Suddenly, a brilliant idea struck the young countess. She decided to convince the knight Ethan, her sister's lover, that his love was worth fighting for to the end. The problem is, however, that several years ago, Ethan joined the Knightly Order of the Black Dragons, commanded by Archduke Raphael Astrid Ludovica. Now, the main character will have a hard time meeting Ethan. John Albrecht's father taught the Archduke fencing when he was still a youth. The protagonist can take advantage of this coincidence to meet her sister's lover. The young countess devised this plan and asked her friend to take her with him. When he returned to the Order of the Black Dragon, John Albrecht promised to take his persistent friend along. Charlotte Bravant is only troubled by the fact that the Order of Knights is ruled by Archduke Louis, who has a very complex character and enormous power in the empire. The protagonist decided to fully explain her plan to her friend. She would infiltrate the knightly order, secretly find Ethan, and convince him to influence Grace not to marry the Duke. After that, everyone would be happy. The young countess was so engrossed in outlining her brilliant plan that she didn't notice the elder Marquis Albrecht enter the room. This came as a great surprise to the girl, and she was deeply embarrassed. The heroine quickly apologized to her fencing teacher for the stupid things she had just said. The young countess replied that she had no serious plan and that it was all just a joke. Charlotte Bravant returned home from the Marquis' estate completely exhausted. The girl had trained extensively that day, and the elder Marquis scolded his student for making foolish plans during training instead of focusing on her studies. The main character was also upset that John Albrecht didn't warn her when his father arrived. It was a very stupid and unpleasant situation, which now makes the girl feel a little ashamed. The senior Marquis and his son told the young countess not to undertake anything on her own. John Albrecht would personally meet with Knight Ethan and discuss Grace's marriage with him. The main character calmed down a bit and looked around. She noticed an unfamiliar carriage parked near her house. The young countess found this all very strange. Charlotte Bravant took a closer look at the unexpected visitor to her house and recognized the old Duke Herman, who was talking to her sister and negotiating something with her. The main character decided to hide and eavesdrop on a conversation between her sister and her potential fiancé. Apparently, they were discussing their upcoming engagement. Duke Herman asks his future bride to make a decision and inform him of it. Gray, for his part, is completely resigned to the circumstances. The main character's sister humbly asks the Duke to discuss all the details of the engagement and wedding after the harvest festival. This is important to the girl. Grace added that the postponement was also due to her sister Charlotte's imminent coming of age. Duke Herman listened attentively to his future bride and said he was prepared to wait as long as necessary. After this, the aristocrat kissed a lock of the young countess's hair and said he would care for her sister as if she were his own daughter. Grace found this all very unpleasant. She could barely hold back her tears because she found the Duke repulsive. After this, Duke Herman politely bid Grace farewell and left. The sad girl watched the unloved aristocrat, who would soon become her fiancé, leave. The main character overheard a conversation between her sister and Duke Herman. She is deeply worried about Grace and is also saddened by the fact that her sister is forced to marry a man she doesn't love in order to save the family from bankruptcy. Charlotte Brevant reflected on her sister's difficult choice, but she wants Grace to be happy and not a victim of circumstance. She must act urgently, otherwise it will be too late. The young countess is glad that her sister isn't yet betrothed to the old duke. That won't happen until after the harvest festival, when Charlotte comes of age, so all is not lost. The girl's spirits rose, and she thought that now was the time to implement her secret plan to save her sister from a rash act that would lead to her death. Charlotte Brevant decided to quickly find the knight Ethan and convince him to continue his fight for the heart of his beloved Grace. The young man must, at any cost, convince his beloved not to marry Duke Herman. The main character used a wig and a false mustache to disguise herself and secretly infiltrate the territory of the Black Dragon Knights. Marquis Albrecht's men are trying to find his student to prevent her from doing anything stupid. The young countess reached Duke Louis's residence without any problems and saw a long line of people wanting to join his knightly order. The girl decided to join the order herself, hoping to find Knight Ethan there and speak with him. Charlotte Brevant, disguised as a young man, took her place in line to sign up for a test that would, if successful, allow her to join the Order of the Black Dragons. The main character decided to get rid of her mustache because she was tired of it, and it could also prevent her from entering the Duke's estate. The young man standing in line behind Charlotte Brevant was very surprised to see that she had thrown away her mustache. After a while, it was the girl's turn. She resolutely walked toward the knights, guarding the entrance to the Duke's castle. The protagonist would not deviate from her goal and would definitely meet Knight Ethan. It turns out that Duke Raphael Astrid Ludovica personally selects candidates for his knightly order, the Black Dragons. He stands at the gates of his castle, staring intently at each candidate. The experienced duke looked into the eyes of the young countess, who was posing as a youth. The aristocrat thought the candidate for knighthood had an overly tender and gentle gaze. The young man, in the duke's opinion, looked more like an angel than a warrior. The Black Dragon commander looked at the heroine intently, thought for a moment, and then said abruptly that she should leave here immediately because she was not fit to be a knight. The main character was very surprised by the stern aristocrat's words. The girl was a little confused and tried to ask the Duke why he was so quick to dismiss her and not allowing her to pass the knighthood test. Duke Louis replied that this candidate had a very unpleasant smile and the appearance of a harmless angel. This was unacceptable for a knight of his glorious company, who would take part in the most terrible and bloody battles in the world. But Charlotte Brevant was no timid person. The young countess was accustomed to always achieving her goals. She decided, no matter the cost, to pass the knightly test. The heroine fell to the ground and began to rant loudly. The girl, unaccustomed to being refused, said she wouldn't leave the Duke's castle until he tested her. The aristocrat relented and asked the young countess to show him her palms. Charlotte Brevant jumped to her feet with joy and raised her palms to the face of the angry Duke, who was now very angry with the unpredictable candidate for knighthood in his company. The seasoned warrior carefully examined the heroine's palms and suddenly realized he was looking at the hands of someone who had extensively practiced fencing. This was evident in the numerous calluses and the shape of the palms, which were trained to grip a blade firmly. Now Duke Ludovica understands perfectly well that such a young man, experienced in the art of fencing, will certainly be useful to him in the Black Dragon knightly squad. The aristocrat looked closely at the heroine and declared that she had passed the first test. Charlotte Brevant was overjoyed by the Duke's words. She couldn't believe she'd managed to convince the aristocrat and pass the first test, but it turned out to be true. Duke Louis's personal assistant looked intently at his commander and asked him why he had decided to allow this strange candidate to participate in the trial. This young man looks very strange, so he should be treated with caution. Duke Louis listened attentively to his subordinate and smiled meaningfully. The aristocrat replied that he was intrigued by the calloused hands of the strange youth, who, judging by everything, possessed skill in fencing. Meanwhile, the protagonist signs up for a trial that will open the way for her to join the Order of the Black Dragons. The secretary asks the name of the new knight candidate. The girl laughed and said her name was Shasha. She didn't want to waste any more time on the test and dreamed of enlisting as a Black Dragon Knight right now. The secretary didn't like that at all. Duke Louis's stern attendant explained that there was a specific procedure for admission to the Black Dragon Knights, the same for everyone. The secretary then added that Shasha would be number 87, and for now, the candidate could wait with the other candidates. The young countess was deeply displeased with such disrespectful treatment. Charlotte Bravant is furious with her stern secretary, Duke Louis, and the entire world for not yet meeting the knight Ethan. The main character calmed down a bit and noticed that a stranger had suddenly approached her. He asked the girl posing as a young man what her number was in line for a knight's seat. The stranger introduced himself to the main character. He said his name was Varon. He wanted to know Charlotte Bravant's number in the queue lined up to participate in the challenge. The girl also introduced herself as a young man named Shasha. She added that she was number 87 in the queue. Varon commented that Shasha looked very young to be a knight of the Order of the Black Dragons. The man thought for a moment and said that the young man should be prepared for the upcoming trial, during which several groups of candidates would fight to the death in a fencing competition. The main character wasn't very happy with these rules. Charlotte Bravant took the blade in her hands and thought about the very difficult test she would have to go through today to become a true knight of the Black Dragons. This knightly order was founded by Duke Raphael Astrid Louis, who was the emperor's nephew and therefore could claim power throughout the empire. The heroine is determined to overcome the upcoming trial and defeat all her opponents, who are already commenting on her fragile appearance. But this is a deceptive appearance, and anyone who dares stand in the young countess's way will pay dearly. Charlotte Bravant immediately demonstrated her skill in the art of fencing, fighting several opponents at once, who did not expect such dexterity and skill from the fragile-looking young man. The young countess's exploits in the training hall are observed by Duke Louis and the young Marquis John Albrecht, who immediately recognizes Charlotte Bravant. But the protagonist's friend doesn't want to betray her. He tries to deceive the Duke and pass his friend off as the young man. John Albrecht was slightly embarrassed under the Duke's intense gaze, guessing the Marquis was acquainted with the strange candidate who wielded the blade so masterfully. The Marquis collected his thoughts and said he knew the young man because he had once trained with him under his father. Duke Louis listened attentively to his interlocutor and realized that the mysterious youth named Shasha had also taken fencing lessons from the elder Marquis Albrecht. The Duke himself had also studied with this instructor. This greatly interested the commander of the Knights of the Order of the Black Dragon. For a moment, Duke Louis thought this frail youth, so masterful in fencing, was a secret agent sent by his enemies. But the suspicious aristocrat couldn't figure out who dared such an unprecedented act of audacity. Charlotte Bravant successfully passed her second trial, breaking all previous records set by other candidates for the Order of the Black Dragon. The protagonist is very pleased with her athletic performance. The girl's new acquaintance, who introduced himself as a mercenary named Varon, also passed the second knightly test with honor and advanced to the next round of selection. He is the second successful candidate who hasn't disgraced himself today. The main character is absolutely delighted. Another young man also performed brilliantly today, astonishing everyone present with his extraordinary fencing skills. His name is Klaus. This young man is an expert wielder of two blades simultaneously, giving his opponents no chance of victory. The main character is the third candidate for knighthood in the Order of the Black Dragon, who has proven herself worthy today and advanced to the next round of selection. But another disappointment awaits her. She must face yet another trial to pass all the exams. The young countess hadn't expected this turn of events. She'd already been determined to soon become a knight and see Ethan, but now her goal remains as far away as ever. Suddenly, the main character's friend, John Albrecht, ran up to her. The young Marquis was furious. He had forbidden his friend from coming to Duke Louis's castle, but she had disobeyed him. Marquis John Albrecht began to scold his friend for arriving at Duke Louis's estate without his permission. The girl had taken part in the test disguised as a young man. This could have very dire consequences. The young aristocrat is deeply upset by Charlotte Bravant's behavior. He fears her deception will be revealed, and the cruel Duke will punish her to the fullest extent of the law. The protagonist tries to reassure the young man. Charlotte Bravant looked intently at her friend and said she was sorry for upsetting the young Marquis, but she had only one way to meet Knight Ethan and speak with him. John Albrecht listened carefully to the young countess and said she was taking a huge risk and she had no idea how great it was. Charlotte Bravant had come up with a good plan, but it was very risky. The main character said she had a magical wig that wouldn't let her down. This disguise would help the girl deceive everyone and achieve her goal. The young Marquis shouldn't worry so much. After this, Charlotte Bravant added that nothing in this world was more important to her than saving her sister, who had taken a rash step. Grace Bravant should be with the knight Ethan, not with the decrepit and elderly Duke Herman. The young countess saw that she had convinced her friend of her rightness, but John Albrecht was still reluctant to admit it. The girl smiled to ease the tension and said she wanted to obtain useful information from the young Marquise. John Albrecht was a little taken aback and clutched his head under the intense psychological pressure from his friend. He said the situation was too dangerous because there had been several recent assassination attempts on Duke Louis. The protagonist listened attentively to her interlocutor and realized that, due to her ignorance, she had found herself in a critical situation. Now, in Duke Louis's castle, the rules and checks were even stricter than before, so she could be exposed. Suddenly, Charlotte Bravant heard the announcement of the start of the third stage of the trial for admission to the Order of the Black Dragon. She told her friend that she must begin the competition immediately. They could talk later. John Albrecht told his friend in parting that the problem wasn't just how to get into the Order of the Black Dragon, but also how to leave it safely. No one was let out of such institutions so easily. The main character returned to the competition arena. She found herself in the same group as the mercenary Varan and the phenomenal swordsman Klaus, who had similar results. Charlotte Bravant was chatting cheerfully with the mercenary Baron. Suddenly, she heard someone teasing her behind her back, saying that any candidate could pass the test under the patronage of Marquis John Albrecht. The main character turned around and saw the Egter family's second son, Vigrun, teasing her. The young man laughed and said he hadn't expected such agility and skill from such a frail young man. After this, the young man politely apologized for his intrusion and said he hadn't meant to offend anyone. Vigrun Egter introduced himself and said he was pleased to meet the resourceful young man who was being protected by Marquis John Albrecht. These words deeply displeased the main character. Charlotte Bravant was relying solely on her own skill in this test. Vigrun Egter had said that during the third test, he would have to fight the instructor, so the young man had no chance of winning. The young countess was tired of listening to this stupid mockery, and she decided to immediately teach a lesson to the impolite aristocrat who dared to insult her and doubt her fencing skills. Vigrun Egter enthusiastically recounts how a knight named Ethan, also patronized by imperial aristocrats, had already joined the Order of the Black Dragon several years ago, but the protagonist had already taken decisive measures to silence this unpleasant young man. Charlotte Bravant refused to listen to the insolent youth's foolish and baseless accusations. She picked up speed and, in a leap, kicked the insolent man in the face with all her might. The young aristocrat immediately collapsed to the floor. The protagonist stands over her fallen enemy. She believes she acted correctly in the current situation. The mercenary Varan is frozen in amazement, but he admires the determination of the brave young man, who is able to stand up for himself in such a difficult situation. Vigrun Egter didn't lose consciousness after falling to the ground. The insolent and reckless young man stares at the protagonist and clutches his broken nose. Charlotte Bravant told the defeated insolent man that she had the patience of a saint, but he was talking too much. After this, the main character drew her blade and declared that she was ready to prove the insolent young man spreading stupid gossip wrong right then and there. There was still plenty of time before the third competition to sort this matter out. Meanwhile, Duke Louis and his faithful assistant discussed the results of the second nightly test, which turned out to be very unpredictable. Duke Louis thought for a moment and then asked if the obnoxious boy, whose hands revealed him to be a master swordsman, had passed the second nightly test. For some reason, the commander of the Order of the Black Dragon took an interest in this unusual candidate for his subordinate. The Duke's aide said that this mysterious youth had performed the best during the second nightly trial. Apparently, he was a promising fighter. Duke Louis recalled that the mysterious youth had also studied fencing with Marquis Albrecht. This fact somehow flattered the experienced leader of the Knights of the Order of the Black Dragon. When the aristocrat entered the competition hall, he saw the mysterious candidate standing with a drawn blade before a defeated youth from the Egter family. This puzzled Duke Louis. Meanwhile, the main character continues to humiliate the insolent young man who dared to insult her. The girl said her only regret was that she didn't encounter Vigrun Egter during the second trial. Duke Louis watches the distinguished candidate closely. The commander of the Knights of the Order of the Black Dragon appraised his movements and concluded that this mysterious youth was very agile despite his slight frame. Vigrun Egter is very upset that many people saw his shameful defeat, but he can't do anything because his opponent won a clear victory over him. Duke Lewis decided to immediately end the duel, which was taking place without his permission in the competition hall. He sternly called out to the participants. The insolent youth felt doubly saddened by the fact that his shameful defeat was witnessed by the commander of the Knights of the Order of the Black Dragon himself. For a young man who also aspires to join this order, this is simply a terrible event. The main character approached Duke Lewis to listen carefully. The aristocrat began to reprimand the candidate, who had once again violated discipline in his castle. After this, the commander of the Knights of the Black Dragon Order smiled meaningfully and said that the rumors about the new candidate turned out to be true. These words left the main character very puzzled and a little at a loss. She didn't understand what the Duke meant. Duke Lewis addressed all the candidates present in a loud voice. He announced that the time had come for the third jousting competition. After that, the commander of the Black Dragon Order pointed to the main character and said that she would be the first candidate. Duke Lewis drew his blade and declared that he would immediately duel the first candidate. This would be the third knightly test. The young countess was terrified, as she hadn't expected such a turn of events. The duel between the experienced knight commander and the young countess began. The protagonist skillfully repelled her opponent's initial attack. Charlotte Bravant admires the strength and agility of Duke Lewis, who demonstrated his fencing skills. Now she understands why this knight is considered the best in the empire. But the protagonist understands perfectly well that she has gone too far and has no right to retreat or give up now. She must become a knight of the Order of the Black Dragon at any cost to save her sister. The experienced Duke repels the young countess's swift and agile attacks and admires her speed, but he, too, has no intention of retreating or surrendering. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights delivered a crushing blow, aiming to break his opponent's blade, but the heroine managed to evade this powerful attack. The candidate's phenomenal agility delighted Duke Lewis. He needed such skilled warriors in his ranks. They would be a fine addition to the knightly order. But the battle was not yet over. The heroine stabilized herself after a dizzying leap that saved her blade from being damaged. She prepared for a new attack. The agile girl continues her lightning-fast attack on the Duke. She understands that the duel must not drag on, as fatigue will affect her speed. Duke Lewis's assistant had never seen a newcomer perform as well as this mysterious young man, who successfully attacked the knight's commander. Meanwhile, the experienced Duke grew tired of toying with the knighting candidate and stopped his attack with his own hand, grabbing his sword by the blade. The heroine didn't expect such a turn of events. After this, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights said that the young man had fought with dignity and had snatched the blade from his hands, despite the fact that he had injured his palm. The heroine felt a sharp pain in her right hand and dropped her sword. She didn't expect Duke Lewis to use such an unusual fencing technique to win. The commander of the Knights of the Order of the Black Dragon approached the young countess and firmly grasped her hand. The protagonist said that the Duke should be careful, as he could have been seriously injured. After this, Duke Lewis took Charlotte Bravant by her soft cheeks and said she talked too much, but now that won't stop them from seeing each other often at the Duke's castle. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights turned and left, leaving the protagonist perplexed. She couldn't understand what Duke Lewis meant. Could he really have decided to accept Charlotte into the order? The Duke's assistant immediately ran up to him and asked if all was well with his master. The nobleman replied that he was perfectly fine. After that, the knights left the competition hall. Duke Lewis turned to his aide and asked him to arrange for the new knight candidate, whom he had just fought, to be assigned to him. Now the young countess would be under the Duke's direct command. Charlotte Bravant overheard these words from the commander of the Black Dragon Knights. She couldn't believe she had successfully overcome all the trials and would now serve in the legendary knightly order. After the Duke left, the main character was congratulated by her new friends. A knight with a scar on his face approached the young countess and asked her name. The girl replied that she could be called Toti. The knight declared that from that moment on, she was accepted into the Order of the Black Dragon. A week has passed since Charlotte Bravant joined the Knightly Order of the Black Dragon. She didn't expect the strict knight training system there. Now, the main character already regrets her actions a little. The scarred knight turned out to be a strict but fair trainer who gave the new cadets no peace. He told his students that if they struggled in training, they would be easy in battle. Morning had arrived. The trainer had awakened the new knights again for their morning training. The main character was very tired after a week in the order. She wasn't getting enough sleep, sleeping only 4 hours a night. A couple of days ago, Charlotte Bravant was in for a terrible disappointment. She was informed that the knight Ethan had recently left on important business and would not return until later in the fall. This left her deeply upset. The protagonist asked her friend John Albrecht to find out the current whereabouts of the knight Ethan. The young Marquis told the girl that the knight was on a mission that required him to constantly move. He couldn't even send a letter right now. John Albrecht suggested to his friend that they flee the Order of the Black Dragons, as Knight Ethan was currently absent, but the girl refused, declaring that she would remain in the Order until autumn to wait for her sister's lover. Another training session has begun. Knight trainer Aaron is explaining the 4 main stages of knighthood today. The coach also said that the main character and her classmates are currently at the lowest level of knighthood. Tomorrow, they will be trained by a knight of the highest rank. And today, all new cadets will have to endure the Ring of Fire test so that they can greet their legendary teacher with dignity tomorrow. These words greatly frightened Charlotte Bravant and her classmates. After this, Coach Aaron looked intently at the main character and said that she would be the first to cross the Ring of Fire to set an example for everyone else. The girl became even more frightened, realizing she could suffer severe burns. Charlotte Bravant doesn't know what to say to her coach. She knows perfectly well she must obey her commander's orders, but it brings tears to her eyes. The main character isn't about to give up. She knew where she was headed, and for the sake of her sister, she'll endure this ordeal, which could cost her her health or her life. The young countess took a quick run and leaped with all her might through the Ring of Fire. The girl has a slight frame, so the leap presented no great challenge. But something unexpected happened. The main character performed a beautiful leap through the Ring of Fire, but her magical wig caught fire and had to be extinguished. But everything turned out well. Meanwhile, Duke Ludwig is trying to figure out the true identity of the mysterious young man Toti, who nearly defeated him during the entrance exam, but so far, he hasn't succeeded. The assistant reported to the commander of the Knights of the Order of the Black Dragon that no one in the city knew anything about a young man named Toti. This was all very strange and suspicious. At first, Duke Lua thought this mysterious youth had been sent by enemies to assassinate the aristocrat, but during the test, the Knight's commander saw no murderous intent in the youth's eyes. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights stares intently at the photograph of the mysterious youth. He finds it very strange that no one knows anything about this man. Duke Louis smiled meaningfully and reflected that sooner or later, information about this mysterious recruit would inevitably emerge. But for that to happen, he would need to be patient and continue his investigation. It was the next morning. The main character and her classmates had finished their grueling morning workout. They were completely exhausted after the mind-boggling physical exertion. Charlotte Bravant gathered her strength and became more cheerful when she remembered that today she would meet her new mentor, a high-ranking knight. This would help her advance in her career and meet Ethan sooner. The protagonist looked sadly at the high wall separating her from the outside world. Behind this wall lay the girl's past life, as well as her sister, who needed help. Meanwhile, Duke Louis is in his study. The aristocrat has received an important letter, which he plans to read immediately. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights opens the envelope and speaks to someone. It turns out Charlotte Bravant has become the Duke's apprentice, who plans to train her to become the finest knight in the Empire. Duke Louis is a very strict and demanding trainer, so he made his student perform physical exercises near his desk. This made it easier to monitor the student's performance. The Black Dragon Knight commander looked closely at his cadet and ordered him to stop his physical exercises and come closer to him. Charlotte Bravant has carried out her commander's orders, but she's afraid he'll hit her or devise a new task for her that will be very difficult to complete. The protagonist is acting very cautiously, but Duke Louis did nothing of the sort. He began asking questions about his new cadet's background. The girl said she would soon be 18 and was of common descent. The commander doesn't believe everything his cadet says. He stared at the main character and asked how she knew Marquis John Albrecht. The Duke noted that Charlotte Bravant was very close to the aristocrat. The main character listened attentively to her commander and immediately began denying that she was a friend of the young Marquis Albrecht. She insisted she had nothing in common with the young aristocrat. Charlotte Bravant said she had studied fencing with the elder Marquis Albrecht and had only seen his son occasionally, but had never been friends with him. Duke Louis stared at the cadet, still incredulous. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights rose from his desk and approached the student. He said he didn't trust the cadet's words because he looked too well groomed and tidy for a commoner. After this, the experienced Duke Louis looked his protege in the eye and asked him point blank who he really was. The aristocrat doesn't like playing silly games. It simply irritates him. Charlotte Bravant knew she had to maintain her pretense, otherwise she would suffer greatly if Duke Louis discovered her true identity. She looked into her commander's eyes and smiled sweetly. Duke Louis realized he wouldn't get anything out of his cadet and let him go. The heroine realized she had avoided the danger of being discovered thanks to her cunning and tenacity. The girl glanced at the letter Duke Louis had received. She noticed that it was a request to explore the ancient ruins of the Western Empire. Charlotte Bravant recalled the story of these ancient ruins. The main character has known since childhood that ancient ruins are scattered across the continent, dating back to a time before the imperial dynasty came to power. These mysterious ruins were sealed with powerful magic to prevent anyone from entering. This ancient magic immediately summons a bloodthirsty demon, which destroys those who dare explore the ruins. No one has yet succeeded in unraveling this mystery. According to the plot of the original novel, which is called The Rose of Bravant, the Emperor orders the Knights of the Black Dragon to infiltrate the largest ancient ruins located in the west of the empire. Thus, the Emperor wanted to demonstrate his power and unravel the mystery of the ancient ruins, but he failed. This led to the terrifying demon breaking free and sowing chaos and war within the kingdom. The girl recalls the plot of the original novel. The Black Dragon Knights will be ordered to destroy a terrible demon. Knight Ethan will set out on this mission and die there, but this must happen after the main character's sister marries. Meanwhile, Duke Louis noticed his cadet carefully examining a letter lying on his desk. The aristocrat again begins to suspect the main character of espionage. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights watches his new cadet closely. He can't quite figure out who this mysterious young man really is, who nearly defeated him during the test. Suddenly, Duke Louis asked the protagonist why she was so interested in the ancient ruins located in the western part of the empire. Charlotte Bravant didn't expect the commander to ask her this. The commander doesn't know it's a girl standing in front of him, so he treats his cadet rather roughly. He grabs his cheeks again with his strong hand and says that from now on, Toti will always be by his side. Suddenly, a nobleman entered the office of the leader of the Black Dragon Knights unannounced. He said he urgently needed to speak with Duke Louis to discuss a pressing matter. The commander was very displeased at being disturbed by the nobleman. He reprimanded his subordinate. The heroine was glad to have once again avoided the Duke's rudeness. The nobleman apologized for intruding into the commander's office and said he had an urgent message intended personally for Duke Louis. Witnesses were out of the question. The main character said she needed to leave because the commander needed to attend to important matters immediately, but Duke Louis didn't like this, as he had a different opinion on the matter. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights glared at the nobleman who had interrupted him. He said he had no intention of speaking with him now, and that all matters could wait. After this, the aristocrat smiled meaningfully and grabbed the main character, lifting her into his arms. Duke Louis's actions left the young countess extremely agitated. She hadn't expected such a turn of events. The protagonist demands her immediate release, but Duke Louis refuses to listen, declaring that he will only receive the nobleman and hear him out in the presence of his new apprentice. After this, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights said that the cadet must obey all orders of his mentor. Otherwise, the student would be severely punished according to all the rules of the knightly order. The main character listened carefully to her commander and said that she would follow all his orders and sit still if that was what he wanted. The nobleman smiled and said that a very important conversation was about to take place and that the Duke should release his student, but the commander of the knights replied that his cadet would not go anywhere and would be present during the conversation. The Duke's uninvited guest was a little taken aback when he heard these words. He believed that matters of state importance should be kept secret and not intended for the ears of mere cadets, who might violate state secrets due to their inexperience. The main character is sitting in Duke Louis's arms. She decided to ease the tension a little, so she said the nobleman could speak freely with the commander of the Black Dragon Knights and ignore her. Charlotte Bravant decided to play along with Duke Louis a little in the current situation, but she did so too cavalierly. This didn't please the knight's commander very much. Now he's a little perplexed by the cadet's behavior. The Duke looks closely at his student and considers whether he should remove him from this room in order to quietly attend to state affairs of high importance. A few seconds later, the commander of the Black Dragon Knight's doubts vanished. He decided to keep the cadet with him. After that, Duke Louis again asked the unexpected guest what important news he had. Charlotte Bravant stares intently at the nobleman who brought the Emperor's message. The girl has soberly assessed the situation and is determined to become the Duke's closest disciple. The Emperor's messenger realized it was pointless to argue with the Duke now, so he placed a scroll with the Emperor's letter in front of him. The protagonist watches closely what is happening now. The commander of the knights thanked the nobleman for the message he had delivered and asked him to convey to the Emperor that he was always ready to serve him and that all his orders would be carried out within the allotted time. The main character is very intrigued by the document the messenger brought to the Duke. She tries to carefully examine this mysterious scroll and decipher its contents. Charlotte Bravant managed to secretly read part of the scroll, in which the Emperor's nephew, without observing court etiquette, was ordered to immediately go to the ancient ruins located in the west of the empire. Meanwhile, the Emperor's ambassador took out from the pocket of his luxurious frock coat a large precious stone, which functions as a recording and broadcasting device. The Black Dragon Knight commander and his cadet prepared to examine the recording contained within this precious device. The ambassador turned on the magical device, and everyone present saw the Emperor, who recorded his message for his nephew. The Emperor of the Empire addressed Duke Louis. He said that not much time had passed since the legendary siege, and the commander of the Black Dragon Knights should take a good rest. But the great commander had a new and important task. The Emperor added that he eagerly awaited the completion of archaeological excavations in the western part of the empire. The protagonist listened attentively to this message. She was a little puzzled, as it was very brief. The young countess knows that the Duke lost his parents at an early age. The Emperor took charge of his nephew's upbringing and loved him dearly. But now the protagonist sees that the relationship between the ruler of the empire and the commander of the knights is very strained. Just recently, the Emperor honored his nephew in front of a large gathering of people after his return from a victorious war against the sworn enemies of the state. After the Emperor's message, which the young countess just saw, she feels as if the Emperor is deliberately trying to subject his nephew to a deadly test. This all seems very strange in the current situation. The girl considers that Duke Louis might refuse such a dangerous mission, but then the Emperor could accuse him of treason. There's clearly malicious intent here. If the commander of the Black Dragon Knights agrees to carry out the order of his royal uncle, he will expose himself and his subordinates to mortal danger, which is more terrible than any war, and he may never return home because he will die. Both scenarios would be disadvantageous and dangerous for Duke Louis. He understands this perfectly well. A brave aristocrat must make his choice and decide his future. The main character looked closely at her commander and thought that this situation was very similar to the one her own sister had found herself in. Sometimes people have to make difficult choices in life. Charlotte Bravant sympathizes with Duke Louis and regrets that she can't help him. It would be wonderful if the young countess could rescue her commander. When the Emperor's message ended, the ambassador said that he would convey to his master Duke Louis's decision to go to the west of the continent and begin archaeological excavations of the ancient ruins. The Emperor's envoy added that the ruler of the empire would be very pleased with the decision taken by Duke Louis. Suddenly, the main character decided to intervene in the noble aristocrat's conversation to remind her commander of something. This way, the girl wants to help the Duke and realize her plans. Charlotte Bravant looked the knight's commander in the eye and said that the Emperor's birthday was approaching. It was an important date that should not be forgotten and should be taken into account before setting out to excavate ancient ruins. The cunning girl also winked at Duke Louis and suggested that her birthday, too, should be celebrated before the expedition to the west of the empire. The Emperor's ambassador listened attentively to the talkative cadet, unable to comprehend what was going on. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights realized Tati was trying to help him, so he decided to play along with his cadet. Duke Louis said he hadn't forgotten the Emperor and his student's birthday and would definitely celebrate them properly. The heroine was glad the commander had joined her game. She winked at Duke Louis again and thought that the Emperor wouldn't dare send his nephew to his death until after the birthday celebrations. Otherwise, it would reflect poorly on his reputation as a good family man. The Emperor's ambassador is perplexed by this turn of events. The nobleman sits on the sofa and ponders what reaction he should expect from the Emperor when he reports what happened here. Duke Louis decided to strengthen his position. He embraced his student and said he could not set out on his campaign to the Western continent until he had celebrated the birthday of the Emperor and his favorite cadet. After this, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights kissed his apprentice on the cheek so that the Emperor's ambassador would think Duke Louis was interested in men, not women. This would help prevent further attempts on the Duke's life by women sent by his enemies. After this, the Knight commander stood up and said goodbye to the Imperial ambassador. The main character didn't expect the Duke to kiss her on the cheek. She's a little confused and perplexed now, unsure what to do. The young Countess now knows that Duke Louis turned out to be a wonderful actor who played his role perfectly in such a difficult situation. When the sovereign's ambassador left the office, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights decided to expose his student and find out everything about him immediately. So the Duke took up his sword and began threatening the cadet. The Duke said he would tolerate no more lies. He wanted to know the truth because his new cadet's speech, manners, and swordsmanship revealed him not to be a commoner, but a nobleman concealing his true identity. The main character froze in fear. The girl hadn't expected such a turn of events, as she had been counting on her master's loyalty. Duke Louis holds his sharp sword to the cadet's throat. The aristocrat is very serious. The young countess realizes she must do something urgently to avoid certain death at the hands of her enraged commander. Charlotte Brevant decided she had nothing left to lose. She closed her eyes and said she was there to save someone close to her. Now let the Duke do whatever he saw fit with his cadet. The young countess's answer puzzled the commander of the Black Dragon Knights. Duke Louis began to calm down. He ordered the suspicious cadet to explain his words in more detail. The protagonist replied that she couldn't reveal all the details, but she had to join the Order of the Black Dragon to save a loved one she held dear. She had no other way to resolve this problem. Charlotte Brevant added that she was not the Duke's enemy, and he had nothing to worry about. He could be absolutely certain of that. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights stared at his cadet, unsure whether he was telling the truth or trying to deceive him. Duke Louis's anger softened, and he turned the sharp sword aside. The aristocrat kept his eyes fixed on the mysterious cadet, who was already making him dizzy. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights is a seasoned warrior who has seen much in this cruel life, full of unpleasant surprises and treacherous enemies. But something tells the Duke that this cadet can be trusted. The aristocrat placed his blade on the table and asked why the cadet was trying to befriend his commander. Perhaps he was plotting a treacherous murder or something else horrific. The protagonist replied that this was not true, but the Duke still doubted the cadet's words. He had been exposed to various dangers and attempts on his life and health by numerous enemies too often. Charlotte Brevant looked her commander in the eye and frankly told him she wanted to help Duke Louis cope with the problems he was currently facing. She felt he needed help, but he refused to admit it, even to himself. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights was enraged once again. The noble aristocrat cherishes his reputation as an invincible and free warrior, accustomed to relying only on himself and his knights in this life. He will never admit to weakness. The heroine approached her commander, who sat down in a chair and said he didn't need help. The girl should avoid interfering in his affairs next time, but the young countess pointed out that the knight's commander was also human, with weaknesses and fatigue. Charlotte Brevant took a deep breath and said there was nothing wrong with one person accepting help from another. These are normal relationships between people that make them stronger and help them overcome life's difficulties. The heroine approached her commander very closely and told him that he was an ordinary man, despite all his titles and combat experience. Anyone can sometimes need help, even the strongest knight, seasoned in endless battles. Duke Louis listens attentively to his cadet's words, stunned. No one had ever dared to speak to him in such an intimate tone. The young man now speaking to his commander sees to the heart of things and thereby compels him to trust. The aristocrat thought for a moment and smiled approvingly. Then he asked the cadet why he had behaved so insolently in the presence of the imperial ambassador. He could receive a severe punishment for that. The knight commander added that the young man's mere words weren't enough. He would only believe the cadet's compelling evidence. Then the aristocrat would believe that Tati was loyal to him and had no evil intentions. The heroine was very upset when she heard this. Duke Louis smiled meaningfully and declared that the cadet should be punished for his intemperance in the presence of the imperial ambassador. The young man was sentenced to clean the crocodile cages. Charlotte Brevant tries to challenge her commander's decision, but Duke Louis remains adamant. He's accustomed to being obeyed and not being lectured morally. Now the cadet will pay for his carelessness and insolence. When the heroine left the Black Dragon Knight's commander's office, the Duke thought that this new cadet was truly very strange. The aristocrat had never met such an unusual student, one that evoked very conflicting feelings in him. After this, Duke Louis reread the Emperor's message that he had received today and began to reflect on it and the ambiguous situation in which he found himself at the behest of his royal uncle. The knight commander reflected on the Emperor's wily and cunning political stance, able to influence public opinion among his subjects as he pleased. This should always be taken into account by anyone dealing with the ruler of the empire. Only thanks to this skill was the Duke's uncle able to seize power and hold it tightly for many years. The knight commander knows that the Emperor will eliminate anyone who stands in his way. The situation developed in such a way that after a successful military campaign, Duke Louis had become very popular among the inhabitants of the empire. This greatly displeased the treacherous emperor. Therefore, he sent his own nephew to his certain death among ancient ruins, inhabited by terrible monsters. Duke Louis is not pleased that some unfamiliar and suspicious cadet has interfered in state affairs, but if not for this young man, the commander of the knightly order would have become a puppet in the emperor's hands. The experienced aristocrat was tired of these thoughts, which gave him a headache, but Duke Louis understood that the cadet had ultimately been right, because there was nothing wrong with accepting help from someone. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights stood up and walked to the window to distract himself from the thoughts that were weighing on him. The Duke thought that now he would have enough time to get to know the mysterious cadet better. Meanwhile, the main character has completed the commander's punishment assignment. The crocodile cages are now clean, but the girl is very dirty and needs to wash herself urgently, making sure no one sees her naked. Charlotte Brevant secretly entered the beautifully equipped and decorated bathhouse where the Knights of the Black Dragon perform water treatments. There's no one in the bathhouse now, and the main character can wash herself in peace. This fact makes the girl very happy. The young countess took off her magical wig and plunged into the water to wash away from her body not only the dirt of the crocodile cages, but also the stress of the past day. The girl completely relaxed in the warm water. Finally, she could be herself, without pretending to be a young man who wants to become a Black Dragon Knight. The main character hasn't experienced anything like this in a long time. Now, the young countess can think about nothing and completely relax in a warm bath. Suddenly, for a moment, the young countess thought that in the vapors of hot water, there was another person who wanted to take a bath. The girl was a little confused and thought she needed to leave the knight's bathhouse immediately to avoid being discovered, but the vision vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Charlotte Brevant believes she was mistaken and mistook the statue for a naked knight who came here to bathe. Suddenly, someone grabbed the main character by the arm and asked who she was and what she was doing there. The stranger said that outsiders were not allowed into the knight's bathhouse. The man has a very strong grip. He holds the young countess tightly by the hand and suggests that she may be an enemy spy sent here to observe the Black Dragon Knights. When the angry stranger calmed down a little and collected his thoughts, he noticed that in front of him stood not a young man, but a fragile and beautiful girl. While the man was in confusion, the main character decided to take advantage of this and took unexpected actions to save herself. First, the girl needed to break free from the stranger's steely grip. To do this, the protagonist pushed the man away and dove into the water. Charlotte Brevant struggles to free herself from a strong, tenacious grip. A few more sharp movements underwater, and the goal will be achieved. The confused stranger cannot understand what is happening now and who this girl is, who possesses inhuman agility. The main character freed herself from the restraint that was restricting her movements. She emerged from the water and realized that now was the time to escape the bathhouse while she still had the chance. Suddenly, the young countess heard the voices and footsteps of knights who had come to the bathhouse to take a bath. Luck was clearly not on the unfortunate girl's side today. The main character hid behind a rock in the pool, listening to the knights' conversation. They discussed the day's events and the talents of the young countess, who manages to carry out all of her commander's orders. Suddenly, Charlotte Brevant's new friends, who think she is a young man, notice someone's presence in the bathhouse. The young countess understands she is on the brink of failure. If the girl is discovered in the knight's baths now, it will be a huge scandal that will reverberate throughout the empire. The protagonist continues to hide behind the stone. She's consumed with shame and fear of being discovered. She can't believe she failed her mission so easily after enduring so many trials. Suddenly, the young countess feels a hand on her shoulder. It turned out to be the stranger the girl had just wrestled with in the pool. This man hadn't given away the main character. He asked the young countess's classmates why they were making so much noise. Charlotte Bravant attempted to leave her hiding place, but a stranger held her back. The protagonist's classmates immediately recognized the man. He turned out to be the second in command of the Black Dragon Knights, Idris Klein. This brave knight possesses a gentle nature and excellent combat skills. Rumors also circulate in the Empire that Idris Klein is Duke Louis's lover. No one knows for sure whether this is true or not. The first deputy commander looked intently at the young countess's bustling classmates and said that, for the moment, he preferred to bathe in solitude and silence. The cadets left the bathhouse. The young knights immediately obeyed their commander's orders, refusing to be punished for their misbehavior. Idris Klein watches his subordinates flee. Meanwhile, the main character had already managed to put on her magical wig and tidy herself up a bit in order to observe at least some rules of decency in the presence of the powerful knight. Idris Klein smiled knowingly and ordered the girl to leave her hiding place as her classmates left the bathhouse. The main character's first thought was to thank the deputy commander for not betraying her and keeping the girl's secret, but now the young countess doesn't know how to explain herself to the knight. Idris Klein listened attentively to the girl and smiled at her warmly. The aristocrat paused for a moment and then said he knew who she really was, and he also knew the young countess's real name. The only thing that bothers the Black Dragon Knight's deputy commander is the circumstances under which they met. A more suitable place could have been chosen for their acquaintance. The main character was very surprised when she heard Idris Klein's words. The girl asked how the knight knew her real name and who she really was. The deputy commander took a towel and said he wanted to talk to the main character in a more suitable place. The girl still hadn't fully recovered and was very nervous. Afterwards, Idris Klein wrapped the young countess in a towel to help her dry off quickly and avoid catching a cold. This is how a true knight shows his concern for a girl who had just tried to deceive him and nearly drowned him. Duke Louis's deputy and the protagonist went to the knight's chambers to discuss the situation. The young countess understands that her future fate will depend on her answers to Idris Klein. The aristocrat sat his interlocutor down and asked why she was in the Order of the Black Dragon, disguised as a young man. This was all very strange and suspicious for the knight. The young countess is ready to answer all of Sir Idris Klein's questions, but first, she wants to know why he didn't hand her over to his commander and is now talking to a violator of the Empire's military law. The Black Dragon Knight's deputy looked intently at his interlocutor and said he had his reasons. Several years ago, Idris Klein had seen Charlotte Bravant at a swordsmanship competition. She had made a strong impression on the knight. Now the main character understands everything. It turns out Sir Idris Klein has known Charlotte Bravant for a long time, but the girl can't understand why the knight hasn't forgotten her all these years. Duke Louis's deputy paused for a moment and added that he did not want to subject a girl from a noble and aristocratic family who possessed an outstanding talent in the art of fencing to a military tribunal without good reason. The protagonist listens attentively to her interlocutor. The girl remains silent, but she is very grateful to the noble knight for giving her the chance to explain the situation. Sir Idris Klein is the type of man who stands by his words and actions, so he can be trusted, so thought the young countess, revealing to him the whole truth about her time in the Order of the Black Dragon. The noble knight listened attentively to his interlocutor and said he was very surprised by her actions. Joining the Order of the Black Dragon to secure her sister's fate could be a very risky move that would not yield the expected results. The Black Dragon Knight's deputy commander added that he found the young countess's actions extremely immature and thoughtless. The situation could end with the protagonist exposing herself and her family to unnecessary danger. Charlotte Bravant listened attentively to the wise knight and replied that her sister's happiness was more important to her than anything else. The young countess took a desperate step because she could do nothing else. Sir Idris Klein continues to listen to the girl's words. An invisible struggle rages within him. On the one hand, the knight must punish the criminal for her deception, but on the other, he understands that Charlotte Bravant acted like a true noblewoman. The protagonist looks into her interlocutor's eyes. The girl trusts the noble knight completely. She said she learned the art of fencing only because of her sister, Grace. Charlotte Brabant added that she was ready to make any sacrifice for her sister. Sir Idris Klein listened attentively to the young countess and sympathized with her. The noble knight paused for a moment and then said that Sir Ethan would not return from his mission for 2 months. These words greatly upset the girl. Idris Klein smiled and said that until Sir Ethan returned, he would keep an eye on Charlotte Brabant to make sure she didn't do anything stupid. Now the main character is quite happy. She didn't expect to get out of this difficult situation so successfully. Moreover, she has acquired a powerful patron. The young countess thanked her benefactor for showing mercy on her, but the deputy commander of the Black Dragon Knights said he would demote the girl after she met with Sir Ethan. The noble knight helped Charlotte Brabant send a letter addressed to John Albrecht. After a frank conversation with Idris Klein, the protagonist expected her studies within the Order of the Black Dragon to become easier. But this turned out to be quite the opposite. Coach Iron cut no corners and demanded that the cadets give their all. The trainer nagged his cadets over every little detail because he believed there were no trivialities in military affairs. The slightest miscalculation could cost a knight his life in battle. Mentor Aaron decided to improve the endurance of his charges, so he ordered them to sit on an invisible chair for an hour. The cadets handled the coach's assignment well, so he decided to reward them for it. The main character and her friends were overjoyed. Knight Aaron smiled slyly and said he would wait for his students after dinner at the castle gates. The cadets would be expected to greet the guests. Evening had fallen. All the Black Dragon Knights, along with their commander, had gathered at the palace gates. Soon, a richly decorated carriage arrived, carrying the knightly order's distinguished guests. The main character watches the arriving carriage closely. She's curious to know who has graced the Order of the Black Dragon with their presence, and why all the knights, including the cadets, have been gathered to welcome the important guests. Duke Louis approached the luxurious carriage and extended his hand to help his guest out. The commander of the knights greeted the guest and said they had not seen each other for 3 months. Charlotte Brabant immediately recognized the guest, who stepped out of the carriage. The young countess didn't expect to see this man, who was so important in this story. It turns out that Cordelia Cardenas visited the Order of the Black Dragon. This aristocrat is the first princess of the Cardenas Empire. The main character remembered that Princess Cordelia was a judge at a fencing competition that took place several years ago. This aristocrat is the founder of the Third Order of Knights in the Cardenas Empire, which is called the Knightly Order of Scarlet. After winning the competition, Charlotte Brabant received an offer from the first princess to join her knightly order. The protagonist declined, but the two girls continued to communicate and became friends. The young countess introduced Princess Cordelia to her modest sister, Grace. This event marked a new stage in the protagonist's life. The main character's sister was overjoyed that Cordelia Cardenas had become the Brabant family's best friend. This strengthened the young countess's position among the aristocracy in the empire. Charlotte Brabant considers the first Princess Cordelia not only her best friend, but also a true like-minded person who would definitely recognize her if she saw her within the walls of the Order of the Black Dragon. The main character didn't expect this turn of events. Now she must devise a way to ensure Princess Cordelia doesn't recognize her under any circumstances. Meanwhile, Duke Louis noticed that something strange was happening with his new cadet Toti, so he decided to leave his guest for a few minutes to check what was going on. The main character decided to wear a helmet to hide her face. This was necessary to prevent Princess Cordelia from recognizing the young countess. Duke Louis approached Charlotte Brabant, who had placed her helmet on her head. She could see her commander's feet through the holes in the helmet. The leader of the Black Dragon Knights lifted the visor of the helmet his cadet was wearing. The heroine was a little taken aback by this. She hadn't expected Duke Louis to notice her. The commander looked closely at the young countess and said that her uniform did not allow her to wear a helmet. Such equipment was reserved for knights of the highest rank. The main character wanted to ask the Duke to make an exception for her and grant her permission to wear a helmet. Meanwhile, the fourth princess of the empire passed by, accompanied by a young aristocrat. She noticed something unusual happening and turned her attention to it. The fourth princess of the empire approached the commander of the Black Dragon Knights and asked what was going on. Duke Louis overheard the noblewoman's question and hesitated to answer. The emperor's sweet daughter, Nadia Cardenas, continues to insist. The fourth princess noticed Duke Louis's hesitation and asked him why he was shouting at his subordinate. The protagonist stares intently at the Empire's fourth princess. She recognizes this aristocrat, who has spent almost her entire life in the imperial palace, never leaving it due to her poor health. The Duke tells the Emperor's daughter that everything is fine here, and she can go to the guest room. Nadia Cardenas replied that she was now at peace and would continue on her way to the Duke's castle. Charlotte Bravant continued to watch the sweet princess closely, whom she had seen so closely for the first time. The main character immediately took a liking to Nadia Cardenas, because thanks to this aristocrat, she was able to avoid another outburst of anger from her stern commander. Now the young countess can breathe a sigh of relief. Charlotte Bravant laughed and loudly thanked the departing princess. Nadia Cardenas, unaccustomed to such familiarity, felt very embarrassed and flustered. The protagonist watches the Emperor's fourth daughter depart, trying to understand why two princesses have arrived at the Black Dragon Order at once. This is an unusual occurrence for a place like this. The young countess believes these noble ladies arrived at the knightly order for a reason. This means something must have happened. It's imperative to find out, because this information could be useful. Charlotte Bravant is pleased to have secured a helmet and avoided punishment for it. She's also glad there won't be any more grueling training today, as Coach Ierin will be focused on the important guests. Suddenly, Coach Ierin burst into loud laughter and announced to the cadets that they were required to immediately report to their personal mentors to continue their training. Vacation was canceled. The protagonist and her classmates were deeply upset when they heard their coach's order, but the cadets immediately set about fulfilling their important mission, working with their personal mentors to ensure the safety of the Emperor's daughters until their departure from the Black Dragon Order. It was morning the next day. The sun bathed Duke Louis's castle in its light. The new recruits of the Order of the Black Dragon had just completed a grueling morning training session. The main character is very tired after a tough training session. She wants to rest and pick some small flowers to distract herself from the physical pain throughout her body. Coach Ierin knows his stuff. All his students become as tough as iron after completing the basic training course. Charlotte Bravant hung her head in exhaustion and despair. She hadn't expected training in the Order of the Black Dragon to be so difficult. She couldn't believe she would have to go to her personal mentor now to continue her work. The protagonist discovered that the princesses had arrived at the Order of the Black Dragon to deliver a message from the Emperor addressed to Duke Louis. The letter stated that the exploration of the ancient ruins was being postponed for 2 months due to the Emperor's birthday. The young countess also knows that today, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights and the Empire's first princess are scheduled to have an important conversation. Perhaps the aristocrats will discuss the current situation. The main character prefers to stay in the garden a little longer to avoid being seen by her commanders, who will definitely force the cadet to do something and not hang around idle. The Empire's first princess mustn't recognize her friend Charlotte Bravant. Therefore, the young countess must come up with a way to remain undetected, other than wearing a helmet. Suddenly, the main character's thoughts were interrupted by a strange noise nearby. She turned around and tried to figure out what it was. Perhaps someone other than the young countess was strolling in the Duke's garden. Charlotte Bravant peeked cautiously around the corner to see who was making the noise in the park. The young countess initially thought the first princess had already finished her conversation with Duke Louis, so the cadet could safely avoid meeting her by going to see his personal tutor. But it turned out the heroine was mistaken. The young countess spotted the Empire's fourth princess in the park. Nadia Cardenas was strolling by the pond and, by all appearances, was in a good mood. The Emperor's sweet daughter, with a contented smile on her face, calmly feeds the fish that live in the park pond. The girl takes great pleasure in this. The protagonist secretly observes the fourth princess of the Empire. Charlotte Bravant is very surprised that such a high-born person is strolling alone in the park without any escort or security. If you think about it, the fourth princess is taking a great risk when she walks alone, because the Emperor has many enemies who would be more than happy to take the opportunity to harm his children. But the sweet aristocrat doesn't seem to care at all. Nadia Cardenas calmly feeds her fish and thinks only of good things. This girl is distinguished by her kind and humble nature. The protagonist calmed down a bit and decided she didn't need to worry about the Empire's fourth princess if she was in the knightly order of the Black Dragon. The aristocrat would be completely safe there. Charlotte Bravant should be more concerned about herself in this situation. Suddenly, the young countess saw a strange man in a mask appear near the Emperor's daughter, raising his blade over the girl to kill her. Nadia Cardenas doesn't notice the assassin, who will soon draw his sharp sword on her. The fourth princess continues to calmly feed the fish and indulge in her dreams. But everything changed quickly. The emperor's daughter felt someone grab her and quickly carry her away from this place. The aristocrat was very surprised by this circumstance and didn't understand what was happening. The wily mercenary struck hard with his sharp blade, but only managed to cut through air as the fourth princess was no longer there. The emperor's daughter was carried off in the arms of the protagonist, who quickly grasped the perilous situation. Charlotte Brabant carried Nadia Cardenas to safety and asked if she was okay. The fourth princess of the empire regained her composure and replied that she was fine. The assassin has no intention of backing down from his goal. He smiled meaningfully and told the protagonist that an ordinary cadet wouldn't be able to stop him. Charlotte Brabant grabbed her blade and ordered the emperor's daughter to remain where she was until the assassin was neutralized. Nadia Cardenas was confused but promised to carry out the cadet's orders. The main character decided to fight a treacherous mercenary who believed he could defeat her in seconds. The girl drew her blade to give the arrogant criminal a fitting rebuff. The masked man smiled again and said the cadet would regret daring to stand in his way. Now the assassin plans to engage the main character in battle, eliminating her and getting to the empire's fourth princess. Charlotte Brabant listened with disdain to the words of a hired killer who underestimated his opponent. This mistake would cost the foolish mercenary his life unless he immediately came to his senses and got out of here as quickly as possible. The heroine, realizing a duel was inevitable, rushed headlong toward her enemy to seize the initiative. The assassin realized he was facing a very capable swordsman after the very first blows Charlotte Brabant dealt him. The young countess is determined to win. She continually delivers powerful blows, which the mysterious mercenary parries with great difficulty. He has never encountered such a dexterous and swift opponent. Moments later, the duel ended, with the assassin dropping his blade after another lightning-fast attack from the protagonist. Charlotte Brabant cannot understand why anyone would dare attack a defenseless princess in broad daylight on Duke Louis's estate. Suddenly, the wily mercenary, who had dropped his sword, drew a dagger and attempted to deliver a fatal blow to the main character. But the girl reacted to this move in time and, in a leap, struck her opponent back, ending the duel. Charlotte Brabant stands firmly on her feet. The young countess's opponent lies on the ground after the girl's swift attack. All ends well for the protagonist and the emperor's daughter. A young countess stands over a fallen mercenary. She asks her adversary how he got into Duke Louis's castle and why he wanted to kill the empire's fourth princess. Charlotte Brabant heard footsteps and shouts. She saw the Black Dragon Knights running toward her, having noticed something strange happening in the park. The heroine was delighted that the knights had rushed to her aid, but the girl reported to her friends that she had already neutralized the assassin who had secretly infiltrated Duke Louis's castle to kill the princess. The wounded mercenary was taken to the infirmary. After this, the young countess turned her attention to the emperor's daughter, who was now rescued and safe. But the main character didn't like what she saw. The empire's fourth princess is in a state of severe shock. She's trembling with fear and unable to recover from the recent assassination attempt. The protagonist decided to take immediate measures to calm Nadia Cardenas down and get her out of shock. The young countess extended her hand to the princess and asked if she was okay. Charlotte Brabant added that the assassin had been neutralized and that the emperor's daughter now had nothing to fear. Nadia Cardenas looked with gratitude at the brave cadet who saved her life. The princess noticed that the main character had sustained a small wound on her hand. There were a few drops of blood on Charlotte Brabant's palm, which slightly startled the emperor's daughter. The young countess decided to quickly correct her minor mistake and said she hadn't suffered much harm from the mercenary's blade. The scratch she had received would heal quickly. The empire's fourth princess doesn't want to hear anything. She's extremely worried and immediately wants to provide first aid to her savior. Nadia Cardenas believes the main character is a young man, so she begins to fall in love with her protector under the influence of romantic emotions. The main character didn't resist and allowed the princess to bandage her wound. Nadia Cardenas deftly bandaged it with her handkerchief and thanked her savior for his help. Charlotte Brabant didn't expect this turn of events. She noticed that the princess was harboring romantic feelings for her. The emperor's sweet daughter wanted to say a few more kind and affectionate words to her protector and propose another meeting, but Duke Lewis suddenly intervened. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights approached his cadet unnoticed and threw his cloak over his head. The Duke rebuked the young knight for daring to appear before the princess in an inappropriate manner. The cadet should have worn his dress uniform. The Emperor's daughter does not understand what is happening here and why Duke Lewis is behaving so cruelly towards his knight, who saved the princess's life. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights stares at the young princess. He thinks the girl is very sweet and beautiful, but she can't understand what true discipline means to a knight. The main character also spoke up. The young countess asked her stern commander to change his anger to mercy and calm down. Duke Lewis listened attentively to the princess and then turned back to his cadet. The commander rebuked the young knight for not wearing formal attire and thereby violating the knightly regulations. The emperor's daughter rushed to her savior's defense. The princess informed the commander of the Black Dragon Knights that the brave cadet needed urgent medical attention, which he could receive immediately in her room. But the stern Duke Lewis would hear nothing. He said he would not burden the princess with such trivial concerns, so the commander himself would take care of his subordinate's health. The leader of the Black Dragon Knights placed his cloak back on the cadet's head and said the young man was to blame for the mercenary's wound. The new recruit should have trained harder to prevent this from happening. After this, Duke Louis added that Cadet Toddy would train even more intensely from that day on. These words greatly upset the main character, as she was already struggling to keep up with the training schedule. Suddenly, the fourth princess of the Empire's sister, Cordelia Cardenas, ran up to her. She was deeply distressed about what had just happened in the park. The first princess carefully examines her injured sister, trying to determine if she is injured. Nadia Cardenas told her sister that she was fine. After this, the Emperor's fourth daughter pointed out the cadet who had saved her life. The protagonist froze in fear, afraid that Cordelia would recognize her. Charlotte Brabant realized she might now need Duke Louis's cloak and covered herself with it, lest anyone recognize her. The young countess said she was simply fulfilling her knightly duty by protecting the Emperor's daughter. Cordelia Cardenas took notice of her sister's brave savior and thanked him for the service he had rendered to the imperial family. The main character has further disguised herself under Duke Louis's cloak. She's on the verge of failure. If Cordelia pays closer attention, she might recognize Charlotte Brabant. The Empire's first princess also noticed that her sister's savior had sustained a wound on his arm. The noblewoman insisted that the young knight receive immediate medical attention. The protagonist replied that he had only suffered a scratch that would soon heal. Cordelia Cardenas didn't recognize Charlotte Brabant. She thanked the cadet again for his excellent service and admired his fencing skills. Suddenly, Duke Louis's assistant approached him and informed him that the assassin had already come to his senses and was ready for interrogation. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights said that he wanted to immediately interrogate the mercenary who dared to commit such a grave and treacherous crime on the territory of the ducal estate. After this, Duke Louis told the protagonist that he would call her later to testify. In the meantime, Cadet Toddy could go to the infirmary to have his wound treated. Charlotte Brabant replied that she would definitely seek medical attention from a physician. She was delighted that the princess didn't recognize her. This meant she could continue with her plan. Night was falling. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights was working in his office, studying a detailed report on today's assassination attempt on the Empire's fourth princess. Duke Louis carefully read the report and came to the conclusion that the Emperor himself was involved in today's assassination attempt on the princess. The commander pondered what he had learned from the report. The Duke had known before that the Emperor was an amoral man, willing to do anything to achieve his goals, but only a truly morally corrupt person would sacrifice his own daughter's life. During today's intense interrogation, Duke Louis's knights discovered that the assassin who attempted to kill Nadia Cardenas was a soldier in the Emperor's service. This soldier escorted the Empire's fourth princess to Duke Louis's estate. He planned to frame one of the Black Dragon Knights for the girl's murder, thereby casting doubt on the order's commander. Duke Louis was gradually becoming overcome with a slight paranoia. He wondered if Cadet Toddy might also be involved in the assassination attempt on the princess. Perhaps he had orchestrated the whole thing to dispel any suspicions his commander had of the young man's espionage. The aristocrat became even more immersed in his gloomy thoughts about the current situation. He concluded that he would continue to monitor Cadet Toddy, who had saved the princess today. At first, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights considered this mysterious cadet an ordinary eccentric, worthy of no attention. But now everything has changed dramatically. Duke Louis realized that he had in his service no ordinary youth, but a mysterious young man with excellent manners, intelligence, and fencing skills. Such skills are not easily acquired. To acquire them, one must move in aristocratic circles. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights can't understand why he's thinking so much about this strange cadet. In any case, Toddy is in the Duke's palace and under his command, so everything will soon become clear. The next morning, the cadets gathered at the training center on the commander's orders. The protagonist can't understand the reason for this unexpected gathering of young knights. Charlotte Bravant decided to ask a knight named Brandon why all the cadets and knights of the Black Dragon had been gathered so suddenly. Brandon hesitated a little at first, but then answered Cadet Toddy that they had decided to hide the case of the assassination attempt on the fourth princess of the Empire from the public. The protagonist listened attentively to Brandon and was very upset when she heard his answer. Charlotte Bravant doesn't understand why such a sudden decision was made regarding the assassination attempt on the princess. Suddenly, Deputy Commander Idris Klein appeared at the training center and informed all the knights present that he would be leading this morning's training. The main character didn't argue with her commander, but she was tormented by the thought that those responsible for the assassination attempt on the Empire's fourth princess would not be punished to the full extent of imperial law. Suddenly, a frightening thought came into the young countess's head. The person who ordered the princess's murder could be a person so important and powerful that the laws of the Empire did not apply to him. Charlotte Bravant thought of the sweet princess, who was only alive thanks to her intervention. Nadia Cardenas's death could only benefit the emperor, who wanted to blacken Duke Louis's name at any cost. Now everything was clear to the protagonist. The young countess concluded that her plan would fail if the duke, as punishment for the princess's death, was sent to excavate the ancient ruins and mines located in the western part of the empire, because the knight Ethan would also be heading there. The girl also thought about the second-in-command, whom she had promised to remain quiet and not interfere for not handing her over to Duke Louis after the confrontation at the Knight's Bath. Charlotte Bravant was afraid of letting down this noble aristocrat. Meanwhile, Deputy Commander Idris Klein addressed the main character. He said Duke Ludwig was summoning Cadet Tati. The main character is excused from morning training today, so she can immediately go to her personal mentor. The girl replied that she is ready to carry out the commander's orders. When Charlotte Bravant visited her mentor, he ordered her to do a thorough cleaning of his office. The girl was not expecting such a turn of events. At first, the young countess thought it was another of the commander's jokes, but it turned out Duke Louis wasn't joking. The main character responded that she hadn't joined the Order of the Black Dragon to clean offices. The girl looked at the stacks of books and documents. After that, she said she shouldn't waste her time cleaning the premises. She needed to train to serve the Empire with dignity. The main character also mentioned that such work would be humiliating for a knight. The cadet would be ridiculed by his own comrades. It would be simply horrific. But Duke Louis didn't listen to Cadet Toddy's arguments. He left his subordinate alone with the books and documents after giving him a mop, a rag, and a bucket of water. The young countess was forced to clean up. An hour later, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights returned to his office to check on Cadet Toddy's work. The protagonist reluctantly cleaned up and longed to return home. Suddenly, Duke Louis turned to the young countess. He told her he wanted to talk to her about the unpleasant incident involving the princess that had occurred in the ducal park the previous day. This greatly surprised the main character. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights suspects Cadet Toddy of spying for his enemies. He wants to immediately find out why the young knight was in the ducal park during the attack on the princess. After all, the cadet should have been at the training center at the time. Duke Louis moved closer to his cadet to exert maximum psychological pressure. The main character immediately noticed this and became slightly embarrassed. The commander continued his persistent questioning. He asked the cadet again why he hadn't reported to his commander after morning training, but instead found himself in the ducal park. The young knight's behavior seemed highly suspicious. The duke thought for a moment and said that his cadet most likely knew the princess would be alone in the park. He wanted to win the affection of the lovely aristocrat, so he ambushed her in such a romantic spot. The main character listened attentively to her commander and became angry at him for such stupid and unfounded suspicions. The girl thought that this had to be stopped immediately. Charlotte Bravant concocted another story that would convince the duke of her innocence. She said she was in the park picking flowers for the duke. Someone had asked the cadet to do so. and deliver the bouquet to the commander. These words piqued the aristocrat's interest. The main character realized that now she had to lie until the very end, so she said that Mr. Idris Klein had asked her to collect flowers for the Duke. Duke Louis didn't expect such an answer from his cadet. He asked again to make sure he hadn't misheard. It turned out that Idris Klein had indeed wanted to give the commander a bouquet of flowers, worried about his frayed nerves. The Black Dragon Knight's commander has calmed down a bit, but still doesn't trust his mysterious cadet, who is acting very suspiciously. Duke Louis thought for a moment and said that from now on, Cadet Toddy was obliged to report to him about all meetings that he had within the walls of this palace. The aristocrat smiled meaningfully and said that in case of disobedience, he would come up with a punishment for Cadet Toddy that he would remember for the rest of his life. The heroine realizes she's once again in a difficult situation, and she's not happy about it. Duke Louis has said the princesses are leaving tomorrow, so the cadet won't be able to seduce the emperor's fourth daughter. But the young countess only regrets that her best friend is leaving this palace, and she will not be able to chat with her as she used to. The commander stared at his cadet. He asked the main character why she was so upset about the impending departure of the emperor's daughters. At first, the young countess didn't understand why the duke was asking her this, but then Charlotte Brevant realized that the commander was simply jealous of everyone around her. In Duke Louis's opinion, his personal cadet should belong only to him. The main character was very happy about the fact that the commander was worried about her and did not want to lose his cadet, who he liked and who had excellent fencing skills. Duke Louis stares at his subordinate. He believes Cadet Toddy thinks too highly of himself, so he will clean his office daily to keep him from getting cocky. The young countess was very upset after such a punishment. She realized she should remain silent and continue cleaning, lest she further anger her commander. Duke Louis watches his enigmatic cadet closely. Sometimes he thinks this young knight looks more like a girl than a boy. He can be a bit too sentimental at times. A few hours before these events, the Duke had met with both princesses in his office. The aristocrats had gathered there to discuss the girl's departure the following day. Nadia Cardenas has expressed a desire to meet the young knight who saved her from an assassin yesterday. She wants to do so before leaving Duke Louis's estate. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights doesn't share the sweet princess's admiration. He's begun to suspect his cadet of some unknown evil intent. Duke Louis immediately realized that Cadet Toddy had not only saved the Empire's fourth princess yesterday, but had also won her heart. Therefore, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights declared that a meeting between the princess and the cadet was impossible. Nadia Cardenas was very surprised when she heard the Duke's answer. Unfazed, she asked the commander why she couldn't meet his subordinate and thank him for the service he'd rendered. Court etiquette demanded it. The emperor's nephew replied that this was confidential information, so he could not say anything to the princess on this topic. Then the Duke realized he had been too rude to the sweet princess and even apologized for his words, but it was too late. Nadia Cardenas was upset and left the commander's office. Several hours passed, and the Duke regretted his actions. Meanwhile, the main character continues to do a thorough cleaning of her commander's office. As she works, she reflects on the recent events that have happened to her. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights watches his cadet closely, wondering why he refused the Empire's fourth princess a meeting with her savior. Perhaps the Duke truly fears losing the young knight Toddy. Several days have passed since the Emperor's daughter's departure. The main character continues her training. She feels better and realizes she's already accustomed to the new reality and training regimen. The trainer turned to the young countess and said Duke Louis had summoned her again. The girl stopped training and headed to her personal tutor. The main character approached Duke Louis's office door and knocked. A voice behind the door loudly called for the cadet to enter. Charlotte Brevant entered her superior's office and froze in surprise. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights wasn't there, but his deputy, Idris Klein, was. This left her a little unsettled. The protagonist asked Idris Klein why he was there and where Duke Ludovic was. The second-in-command replied that the Duke was not yet ready for the appointed meeting, but would be arriving soon. The young countess felt a little awkward and told the second-in-command that in that case, she would come a little later to meet Duke Louis. Idris Klein invited the girl into the office and sit on the sofa. He said he had some interesting news they could discuss while the commander was away. The aristocrat added that he had sent a letter to Lord Albrecht, as the young countess had requested. The count's reply had recently arrived, so the girl could read it. This news greatly pleased the protagonist. John Albrecht sent the young countess what she requested. The deputy commander of the Black Dragon Knights inspected the package's contents and handed it to the protagonist. The girl thanked Idris Klein for his assistance. The main character was also very happy that her friend John Albrecht quickly fulfilled her request and did everything she asked. The young countess thought that her loyal friend should be thanked when she returned home. Idris Klein watches the main character closely. He paused for a moment and then asked her how she was feeling and how things were going with her time in the knightly order. After all, not even every man could handle that. The young countess thanked the deputy commander for his sincere concern for her. She said she was perfectly fine. She had even learned how to sneak into the knight's bathhouse to bathe there in peace. Idris Klein said he was happy for the young countess. Then he added that he had to deceive Duke Louis and tell him that he had sent Cadet Tati to the park to pick a bouquet of flowers for the commander. The aristocrat thought for a moment and said the main character could come see him whenever she needed help. Meanwhile, the leader of the Black Dragon Knights entered the office, and the other two noticed him. The Emperor's nephew overheard the final part of the conversation between Idris Klein and the cadet. The commander asked his subordinates when they had become so close. The main character felt a little awkward in Duke Louis's presence. She stood up to greet the commander. She smiled and said she hadn't noticed the knight enter the office. The strict commander said that a knight of lower rank was not required to engage in non-compliance with his superiors. It was against the regulations, and such an offense could be punished accordingly. Duke Louis turned to his deputy and declared that there could be no personal matters in his knightly order. All knights serving there must devote all their time and energy to the prosperity of the order. The young countess listened attentively to her commander. The girl wondered if Duke Louis was jealous of Idris Klein's relationship with her. Could these knights really be that close? It all seemed very strange. The main character smiled meaningfully. After that, the girl realized that Duke Louis and his deputy might be not only close friends, but even closer. But that's not certain. Be that as it may, the young countess must now correct the mistake she made. She inadvertently caused a quarrel between her best friends, and now she simply must reconcile them. The heroine fell to her knees before her commanders and bowed her head in submission. She declared that the knight's quarrel was her fault, and she was prepared to immediately suffer the deserved punishment for her misdeed. The aristocrats weren't expecting this turn of events. They stared at the cadet, who was kneeling and begging for their forgiveness. This situation left the knights a little unsettled. Charlotte Brevant wants to help Idris Klein at any cost and ensure that the commander doesn't resent her. She said she wanted to befriend Idris Klein in order to get closer to Duke Louis. The protagonist added that she had always dedicated herself entirely to the prosperity of the Black Dragon Order. Today's meeting with Idris Klein was also meant to serve this noble purpose. The perplexed commander stares at his cadet. He's unsure whether he can trust this young knight, who's already demonstrated several talents, but still arouses vague suspicions. Idris Klein intervened in the conversation. The aristocrat told his commander he simply wanted to discuss the affairs of the knightly order with the young cadet, nothing more. For convenience, he invited the youth into his chambers, but this would not happen again. The protagonist was delighted that Duke Louis had become kinder after his second-in-command's words. She asked the commander if he believed her. The aristocrat replied that he believed not the words of his cadet, but Idris Klein's story. This answer completely satisfied the young countess. The main thing was that the Duke believed her excuses. Now the commander had changed his anger to mercy and would not punish anyone. Duke Louis turned to his deputy and said he was taking him with him to inspect the trade guilds together. Both nobles, along with Cadet Tati, headed to a bustling area near the Black Dragon Knights Order. The merchant guilds, which the knights wished to inspect, are located here. The main character is strolling through a crowded city, enjoying the stroll. She's exhausted from her grueling daily workouts. Now she can relax a bit and spend some time outside the ducal estate, which she's already grown quite tired of. The young countess approached Idris Klein and suggested he have lunch at a nearby diner. This suggestion somewhat surprised the pensive second-in-command. Idris Klein looked at the girl intently and replied that the inspection was not yet over. They would dine a little later with the other knights, when possible. The main character was a little disappointed when she heard her commander's answer. She was already hungry, having eaten nothing today. She couldn't understand why Idris Klein couldn't break the usual inspection schedule and just have a snack. The young countess also can't understand why Duke Louis took her along to this event. For some reason, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights refuses to include her in the negotiations with members of the merchant guilds, leaving his student on the street with his deputy. The main character was a little disoriented, hungry, and confused by the situation she'd found herself in. Idris Klein told her they would soon meet Duke Louis again and have lunch then. Suddenly, the girl heard the voice of her fencing instructor, the elder Count Albrecht. The young countess didn't want her mentor to recognize her, so she became very frightened and confused by the situation. It turns out that the elder Count Albrecht had visited this shopping arcade to buy himself a new blade. The main character tries to escape quickly, and Idris Klein stares at the girl, unable to comprehend anything. The second in command stopped the girl, who had suddenly started to walk away. He asked the young countess why she was panicking. Charlotte Bravant told the knight that she urgently needed to hide somewhere. There was no time to think in the current situation. Idris Klein quickly reacted and shielded the young countess as her fencing master passed by. The elder Count Albrecht didn't notice his student. Idris Klein covered the main character's mouth with his hand to prevent her from revealing herself. The girl immediately understood and was very surprised by her commander's actions. The deputy chief of the Black Dragon Knights once again rescued the young countess and proved himself to be a true gentleman. The protagonist thanked the aristocrat for his assistance. The girl realized that it would be better for her to remain within the ducal estate in the future to avoid encountering others who might recognize her and expose her. Suddenly, Charlotte Bravant lost her balance due to her extreme excitement and knocked Idris Klein to the ground. A moment later, the protagonist found herself on top of her commander, causing her to feel extremely awkward. At this awkward moment, Duke Louis appeared and saw his subordinates lying on the ground, embracing each other. The commander was surprised and asked the knights what they were doing there during his absence. Charlotte Bravant quickly jumped to her feet and began to defend herself. She said everything wasn't as the commander imagined. Duke Louis stares at his deputy and cadet Tati. The aristocrat feels like he's being tricked again. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights made no comment on the situation. He paused for a moment and then said that Cadet Tati should follow him immediately. The main character realized that Duke Louis was taking her with him to his next meeting with the merchants in order to avoid further rapprochement between the young knight and the second in command. Charlotte Bravant suggested that Duke Louis should take Idris Klein with him. An experienced knight would be much more useful at the meeting with the representatives of the Merchant Guild. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights said his cadet was talking too much, so he should immediately shut up and follow the Duke. A few minutes later, the protagonist found herself in the meeting room of the Raiden Merchant Guild. She hadn't expected there to be so many people there, but she was very interested in being here. Representatives of the Raiden Trade Guild, which belongs to Duke Louis, said the Emperor wants to illegally seize their mines. This cannot be allowed to happen. The Emperor's birthday celebration is coming soon. Duke Louis will have to make a difficult decision to prove his loyalty to the ruler of the empire, who seeks his destruction. The first option might be a public oath of allegiance to the Emperor, but this could prove too humiliating for the proud Duke, who is not accustomed to dissembling. The second option is also highly questionable. Duke Louis would have to hand over his iron mines, which are located in the north of his domains, and generate enormous income, to the ruler of the empire. A ruby mine was recently discovered in the duchy. It could be given to the emperor as a token of loyalty and obedience. That's the third option, and it's also highly questionable. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights needs these resources to maintain and develop his knightly order. If Duke Louis loses the iron and ruby mines, he will go bankrupt and lose his power within the empire and beyond. The protagonist watches her commander closely. During his meeting with representatives of the Commerce Guild, she knows what decision Duke Louis must make to defeat the treacherous emperor, but the moment has not yet come. Duke Louis turned his attention to his cadet standing next to him. He noticed that Tati was acting a little strangely, as if he were the emperor's spy. But the aristocrat will think about this later, because now he needs to resolve the issue of the mines, which should be given free of charge to the treacherous emperor. Thoughts of the mysterious cadet who saved the emperor's daughter haunt Duke Louis's mind. Consequently, he can't fully concentrate on his affairs. This could have very tragic and unpredictable consequences in the current situation. Charlotte Bravant watches her commander closely. It's the first time she's seen Duke Louis so pensive. The brave knight is too lost in his thoughts, which torment him and prevent him from finding inner peace. The protagonist can no longer stand by and do nothing. She understands that the moment has arrived on which Duke Louis's future depends. She must immediately intervene in this situation to help her commander. The young countess steeled herself. She wanted to speak at the council and express her thoughts. Perhaps Duke Louis would listen and take this information into consideration. Charlotte Brabant addressed the deliberating lords and declared that the Duke must hand over the ruby mine to the Emperor. Everyone present froze and fell silent when they heard the girl's words. The representatives of the Ryden Trade Guild weren't accustomed to outsiders interfering in their affairs, so they began to protest loudly. Duke Louis ordered all merchants to remain silent immediately. After this, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights ordered his cadet to continue his speech and elaborate on his points. The main character pulled a bag of rubies from her pocket and placed it on the table. This greatly surprised everyone present at the meeting. After this, the girl told her commander that he should hand over his ruby mine to the Emperor without hesitation. This was essential, as rubies would soon plummet in price due to the fact that there would soon be more of them than needed. The young countess added that iron would always be valuable, but rubies, now a rare gemstone, would soon lose their value. Then Duke Louis would be the winner. Red diamonds are currently very expensive because they are mined only in the lands controlled by Duke Louis, but that will soon change. Soon, thanks to the efforts of the Empire's geologists, numerous new ruby deposits will be discovered, which will lead to a drop in their price. When the protagonist finished her explanation, a strange man grabbed her and accused her of treason. He believed she was a spy for the Emperor and was trying to influence Duke Louis to make a decision unfavorable to him. The man who attacked the young countess is named Maurice. He is the head of the Ryden Merchant Guild. The protagonist's words simply infuriated him. This man will never allow the Duke's ruby mine to be given to anyone. The leader of the Black Dragon Knights immediately intervened. He pushed aside the enraged man who had attacked Cadet Toddy. Duke Louis would not allow anyone to harm his knight. The merchant, Morris, continues to be indignant and accuses the main character of espionage and secretly working for the ruler of the Empire. But Duke Louis still wants to hear his cadet's arguments to the end. The head of the Black Dragon Knights ordered the merchant Maurice to remain silent. The aristocrat wants to hear out his cadet's words to finally get to the bottom of the situation. The young countess is afraid to speak. She fears saying something unnecessary and thereby incurring the wrath of her commander, who will punish her for it. But with nowhere to retreat, the protagonist will speak her mind. The red diamonds, which are now lying on the table in front of everyone present at the meeting, the girl received for a small job that she recently completed in one of the ports of the Empire from one of the merchants who arrived from a distant country. Duke Louis and the head of the merchant guild, Ryden, listen attentively to Cadet Toddy's arguments. They can't believe the girl received such a generous reward for the small amount of work she did at the port. The protagonist continued her story. The girl noted that red diamonds are mined only in dry, hot places, of which there are many in Duke Louis's domain. The young countess added that this should be remembered by all present before she continued to set forth her irrefutable arguments on this important matter. It turns out that red diamonds don't originate in the depths of the earth. They are produced by special insects that inhabit the eastern continent. Recently, winds from these lands brought a number of these insects to the territories controlled by Duke Louis. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights listens attentively to his cadet. He begins to understand where the young knight is heading with his story. The main character said that the eastern continent is home to many insects that produce red diamonds. Therefore, these stones are available there in huge quantities and are practically worthless. The head of the merchant guild, Ryden, intervened in the conversation. He said he'd never heard such nonsense in his life. According to the merchant, Maurice, the young knight was currently deceiving everyone, pursuing his own secret interests. The young countess told the merchant he was wrong to attack her. If he didn't believe the girl's words, they could be tested experimentally within a week. Duke Louis listened attentively to the heroine and decided there was a grain of truth in her words. He could wait a week to verify the veracity of his cadet's words and make a final decision. All this is well and good, but right now, the leader of the Black Dragon Knights is most concerned about where young Tati actually got the red diamonds. Perhaps this mysterious cadet is lying. The Duke looked closely at the young countess and said that she supposedly knew that the meeting would discuss the red crystal mines, which was why she had brought them with her. It was all very suspicious. The main character doesn't know what to say to her commander. She frantically tries to come up with some excuse to justify herself. The leader of the Black Dragon Knights stares at his cadet. He desperately wants the young man to say something coherent and trustworthy. The protagonist decided to act confidently because she had nothing to lose right now. She assumed a confident stance and announced in a loud voice that she had obtained red crystals to ease her difficult life at the Duke's estate. The young countess winked at her commander and added that she wanted to win Duke Louis's favor at any cost. The girl also added that she had obtained valuable information thanks to her connections on the Eastern continent. The Duke and the head of the Commerce Guild, Raiden, listened attentively to the cadet. The main character said that the Duke should postpone his decision until the test results, which would be ready in a week. The head of the Black Dragon Knights and the head of the Merchant Guild consulted and decided that, given the current situation, an inspection would certainly not hurt. Thus, the young countess's proposal was accepted. To successfully conduct the experiment, the heroes needed insects that produce red crystals. To catch them, the protagonist went to one of the Duke's mines. After 7 days, the captured insects produced red crystals. This meant the experiment was successful, and the protagonist had proven her point. Duke Louis carefully examines the red diamonds produced by a successful experiment with insects that inhabit his mines. The aristocrat is very pleased with the test results. The head of the Merchant Guild, Raiden, saw the red diamonds and began to lament his failure to trust Cadet Tati earlier. Now the merchant looks very unfavorable. His reputation has been damaged. The protagonist assumed a confident stance and said the test results confirmed her innocence. Therefore, all charges and suspicions against her should be dropped immediately. The head of the Merchant Guild, Raiden, didn't hesitate. He immediately admitted his innocence and bowed humbly before Cadet Tati. The young countess was somewhat surprised by Maurice's behavior. The merchant bowed his head low before the heroine and said he had treated her judgment with disdain, which had backfired. He apologized for his words and the accusations of spying for the emperor. The young countess stares at the head of the Merchant Guild, thinking that this man is loyal to Duke Louis. He only made a mistake out of concern for his master's safety and well-being. The heroine smiled warmly and hugged the unfortunate merchant, who sincerely repented of his mistake. The girl said she forgave Maurice, but now he must be more reasonable. The merchant couldn't believe Cadet Tati had forgiven him so easily and reconciled with him, but the girl replied that she had become accustomed to such accusations from the Duke, who, incidentally, never apologized to her. Maurice listened attentively to his interlocutor and said that she was a very kind and generous person. He had never met anyone like her before. Suddenly, the head of the Merchant Guild turned to his master and said that he had some important words to say regarding the current situation. Maurice fell to his knees before Duke Louis and declared that he had made the gravest mistake of his life. Therefore, he no longer deserved his position as head of the Raiden Trade Guild. Maurice requested his immediate resignation. The protagonist stares at the merchant, unable to believe what she's hearing. She didn't want to harm this dedicated and loyal worker, or lead him to be fired from his important and responsible position. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights listened attentively to Maurice and said he understood everything, but this answer didn't satisfy the protagonist. The girl stood up for the head of the Commerce Guild. He deserved to remain in his post. The Black Dragon Knights deputy commander and the head of the Commerce Guild have always been Duke Louis's loyal allies. He must take this into account before making his final decision. The main character approached Maurice and told him he shouldn't resign. In the current situation, it was simply unacceptable. The merchant doesn't understand why he should act differently. He's made a mistake, and so, to preserve his honor, he must resign and make way for a more competent person. The young countess continued to insist. She grabbed the head of the Merchant Guild by the collar and began shaking him to bring him to his senses. The main character said that Duke Louis trusted Maurice and that this was very important. Furthermore, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights is currently in a difficult situation as the emperor has decided to eliminate him and seize his property. Abandoning Duke Louis would be a crime. Now all the people loyal to the Duke must rally around him and, together with their master, repel the blows of a merciless fate, which is not now kind to the unfortunate Duke. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights watches the main character closely and listens to what she's saying. Duke Louis can't believe his ears. He's never heard anything like it before. Cadet Tati turned to his commander and asked him to immediately confirm what he had just told Maurice. The Black Dragon Knight commander was a little taken aback and covered his face with his hand. He didn't know what to say in this situation. Duke Louis thought for a few moments. He was very pleased to be cared for by this strange young man, who only today seemed like a traitor in the secret service of his sworn enemy. The main character began scolding the head of the merchant guild again for wanting to resign. The girl ordered the merchant to immediately apologize to the duke and take back his words. A month passed after these events. The emperor's feast day arrived, which required the resolution of many important issues that had accumulated. Duke Louis is in his office. His assistant has prepared all the paperwork needed to officially hand over the ruby mine to the emperor. The secretary is busy with paperwork and explains that, thanks to Cadet Tati, Duke Louis was able to avoid major financial losses. The transfer of the ruby mine to the emperor will only benefit the Black Dragon Knight's commander's business. Duke Louis thought for a moment and said that, thanks to Cadet Tati, he had been able to learn in advance of the red crystal's low value. Otherwise, the emperor would have received the iron mines as a gift, which would have destroyed the order of the Black Dragon's economy. The secretary listened attentively to his master and added that red diamonds would soon become very cheap because they were becoming increasingly abundant. This always negatively impacts the price of such resources. Duke Louis completely agrees with his assistant. He looks out the window of his office, lost in thought. It seems the commander of the Black Dragon Knight's thoughts are elsewhere. A few minutes later, the duke collected his thoughts and headed off somewhere. The secretary asked his master when he would be leaving for the emperor's feast. The commander replied that he would be leaving soon, but first, he needed to take care of one more matter. Meanwhile, the main character continues her training under the watchful guidance of the Knight Iran, who keeps a close eye on the young cadet and constantly looks after him. Duke Louis ordered Cadet Tati to immediately stop training and join him in his carriage. He took the young man with him to the emperor's birthday party. The young countess was a little confused, as her sister and her trainer would likely be at the imperial banquet, who would surely recognize her and reveal her secret. It would be a complete disaster if nothing was done. The main character looks at her commander, who is dressed in a luxurious uniform and looks absolutely magnificent today. The girl can't understand why Duke Louis is so calm today before the decisive meeting with the treacherous emperor. Suddenly, Duke Louis broke the tense silence and told Cadet Tati that he would be attending the imperial banquet as his commander's partner. He needed to maintain his reputation as a man interested in other men, not women. This was for security reasons. The young countess didn't expect such a turn of events. She never aspired to such a role, but fate decreed that the main character would now become her commander's undercover partner. Duke Louis said he had to leave his deputy at the family castle to oversee the Order of the Black Dragon. Now he would have to think about a suitable outfit for the young cadet. The commander pointed the protagonist to the chest containing her formal attire. The girl hadn't expected Duke Louis to be so thoughtful. The young countess opened the chest and found clothes she really didn't like. She preferred a completely different style of clothing, but she didn't know how to tell her boss this without offending him. Charlotte Bravant, accustomed to luxurious and stylish attire, pulled a shirt from her chest and told her commander that the garment was simply hideous. Duke Louis listened to his cadet and replied that he had not chosen the outfit. By evening, the protagonist and her commander arrived at the imperial castle. The celebration of the emperor's birthday had already begun, and almost the entire elite of the Cardenas Empire had gathered for the event. Duke Louis entered the ballroom accompanied by his young cadet, dressed in full dress. The main character also donned a mask so no one would recognize her. The young countess hopes that everything will work out and that no one will recognize her in the mask that she found in a hurry in a chest of clothes on the way to the imperial palace. Suddenly, the main character saw her sister, Grace Bravant, among the guests at the banquet. For her sake, she joined the Order of the Black Dragon. The young countess was terrified that her sister would recognize her even with her mask on. Charlotte Bravant pressed closer to her commander and covered her face with her hand to avoid being recognized by her sister. Duke Louis couldn't understand why his cadet was so embarrassed. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights glanced around and immediately realized that the young man who had accompanied him to the banquet was uneasy about the large number of guests. Perhaps the cadet was unaccustomed to such a setting and was worried about it. Duke Louis hugged the main character tightly and said that no one would dare offend her at this event if they pretended to be a loving couple. This greatly surprised the girl, as she was unaccustomed to such treatment from men. The commander approached the young countess and said that she should relax and enjoy this magnificent celebration, which only happened once a year. A minute later, Duke Louis's plan worked. The guests were convinced that the commander of the Black Dragon Knights had a new lover and completely lost interest in the couple, turning their attention to other guests. The knight commander extended his hand to his cadet and smiled. He told the young knight not to take all this seriously, as it was merely a clever publicity stunt meant to mislead the audience. The main character took her commander's hand and listened attentively. After that, the girl said she was playing this game for the last time. She didn't want to engage in any more foolishness. After this, the young countess was finally able to truly relax and enjoy herself at the banquet. She had been so busy with various serious matters that she had completely forgotten what rest was. Suddenly, the main character developed a stomach ache due to the heavy meal and the stress she'd experienced. She complained to her commander about her discomfort and asked him what she could do to resolve the problem. Duke Louis listened carefully to his cadet and decided to let him go back to his estate because he had already fulfilled his role at this banquet. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights added that he needed to speak with the emperor again. After that, the duke would catch up with his cadet. These words greatly surprised the protagonist. The young countess watches the departing commander, confused as to why he's acting so strangely. She hadn't expected this turn of events, and now doesn't know what to do. Charlotte Bravant was convinced that Duke Louis was now pleased with her behavior. This was crucial for the young woman. This would help her win her commander's favor and carry out her plan. The main character found a secluded spot to lie down and rest a bit. She'd been on her feet all day and had experienced many stressful situations, so she was very tired. Despite all the difficulties, the young countess is overjoyed to be able to see her sister Grace today after a long separation. This is a wonderful event that gives the girl strength to continue her struggle. Night has fallen. The main character is already asleep, but she's suddenly awakened by the sound of a window opening. She wakes up to see a strange masked man entering the room, resembling a hired killer or something similar. Charlotte Bravant hid behind the sofa to conceal herself and safely observe the strange visitor. She realized that this man had come to Duke Louis's room to steal something. A thief rummaged through the belongings of the Black Dragon Knight's commander and planted a vial containing a deadly, colorless, odorless poison. It's a very powerful and dangerous substance. The criminal came here with malicious intent. Most likely, he wants to plant poison on Duke Louis so that, at a convenient opportunity, he can accuse him of treason and the intention to poison the emperor. The main character continues to secretly observe the cunning criminal. The girl immediately realized his evil intent and is now wondering who would frame her commander. The young countess looks at her commander's suitcase, which contains a vial of deadly poison. If the emperor discovers this vial, Duke Louis will be forced to travel to the west of the empire to meet his inevitable death. Suddenly, the mercenary spotted the main character. He drew his blade and prepared to attack the girl, eliminating any unnecessary witnesses to his crime. The young countess told the mercenary that he would immediately pay for his crime. Let the criminal take his life while he still had the chance. The main character added that she was her commander's best swordsman. Afterward, the girl dealt the treacherous criminal a powerful blow with her blade, which he parried with great difficulty. The girl prepared to strike her opponent again with her blade. The protagonist said the criminal could only escape death if he immediately laid down his weapon and handed her the vial of deadly poison. The mercenary decided to take advantage of the situation. He tossed the vial of poison aside and told the protagonist she'd have to catch it if she wanted it. The young countess leaped long to catch the fragile vial of poison, which would be crucial evidence of the duke's innocence if presented to the right people in time. But in doing so, she put herself at a disadvantage during the fight with the mercenary. She was taking a huge risk now. Now the protagonist is at a disadvantage and close to defeat. The mercenary said the duke's cadet only has a few seconds to live, but the brave girl has no intention of giving up. The young countess has gathered her strength and is ready to fight to the end. May the strongest win this battle. Charlotte Bravant stared at her opponent and smiled meaningfully. She was ready to attack the criminal again, ready to give him a fitting rebuff. Meanwhile, Duke Louis and his personal secretary are returning to their quarters after a business meeting with the emperor. Both aristocrats are upset about something. The Black Dragon Knight commander's secretary gritted his teeth and muttered something unintelligible. This young man was not pleased with his meeting with the emperor. Duke Louis's assistant is upset that the treacherous emperor has been so cold in accepting the gift of a red crystal mine. The emperor pretended he wasn't worthy of such a precious gift, but everyone knows this is coquetry and hypocrisy. The Black Dragon Knight commander grew tired of his assistant's muttering and said he should stop immediately, otherwise, he would be punished for disobedience. After this, Duke Louis approached the door of his room and said that the assistant should make all preparations for a speedy departure home from the imperial palace. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights entered his room to inform Cadet Toddy of his imminent departure home, but Duke Louis saw not his knight there, but only bloodstains on the floor, carpets, and furniture. Duke Louis froze in astonishment. The bewildered aristocrat didn't know what to make of what had happened. The commander was simply afraid to imagine that the worst had happened and his young cadet had died. The Duke's assistant, Romeo, entered his chambers and also froze in amazement and confusion when he saw the bloody aftermath of the battle between the young cadet and the mercenary. It all seemed too strange and frightening. Duke Louis and his secretary decided to quickly investigate the crime scene to find clues that would help them understand what had recently happened there. Romeo found the heroine's blade and said that Cadet Toddy had decided to pursue the enemy without the extra baggage that would hinder him during the chase. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights looks around the room carefully, thinking that someone very brave or truly reckless dared to attack the servant of Duke Louis, who is famous for always giving justice to those who dare to insult or harm him in any way. Meanwhile, the main character managed to defeat and capture the mysterious mercenary who wanted to plant a vial of deadly poison on Duke Louis. The young countess captured the mercenary and bound him with her ribbon. Now she demands the criminal reveal who instigated him to frame the commander of the Black Dragon Knights. The heroine looked around, trying to figure out an effective way to quickly and safely transport her captive to the imperial palace. Suddenly, she heard her master's voice. Through the dense undergrowth of the night forest, Duke Louis approaches the young countess. The aristocrat is very agitated and tense. He is searching for his young cadet, whom he treasures. The girl was overjoyed when she saw the commander of the Black Dragon Knights. She laughed and greeted her master. Charlotte Brevant approached Duke Louis and told him she had managed to apprehend the criminal who had entered his chambers. She added that the hardest part had been saving his life, as he had put up strong resistance during his arrest. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights stares at his cadet and remains silent. He thinks he'd given up hope of ever seeing the young knight alive, as his entire room is smeared with blood. Duke Louis took his subordinate's hand and noticed a small cut on Cadet Toddy's palm. The commander asked the young knight if he was all right. The girl stares into her boss's eyes, and she imagines he looks at her tenderly. The protagonist can't figure out if this is truly true. She tries to decipher Duke Louis's mysterious gaze. The young countess told her master that she was fine. She had simply reopened an old wound she had sustained in the ducal park while rescuing the emperor's fourth daughter. Suddenly, a mercenary intervened in the conversation and began mocking the main character and her master. The criminal began joking and making faces to show his disdain for the knights who had captured him. Duke Louis didn't hesitate for long and immediately kicked the mercenary who had dared to interrupt the conversation and show disrespect for the knights. The criminal let out a soft sigh and immediately fell silent. The protagonist looks at the silent mercenary with surprise and fear. Now she fears that the criminal she so painstakingly captured may not live to see a fair trial, thanks to the overzealousness of the Black Dragon Knight's commander. The young countess thought that if Duke Louis dealt the criminal a couple more such powerful blows, he would die. But this could not be allowed, because she needed to find out who had hired him to frame the knight's commander. Duke Louis remained icy calm. The aristocrat looked closely at the criminal and confirmed that he was still alive. Afterward, the commander asked his cadet if he had sustained any other wounds today. The protagonist replied that she no longer had any wounds. She only had the blood of the mercenary she had fought earlier that day. She also noticed that the commander was looking at her with tenderness again. But Duke Louis doesn't believe his student's words. He thinks the youth is too proud to admit weakness, so the commander ordered the young knight to strip completely naked for inspection. The young countess was very surprised by the commander's unexpected order. She didn't want to undress, so she swears she hadn't sustained any wounds today and is perfectly fine. Duke Louis treasures his personal student too much, so he continues to insist that he allow himself to be examined for wounds. Suddenly, something unexpected happened, preventing the girl's examination and the discovery of her secret. The fourth princess of the empire, Nadia Cardenas, suddenly appeared among the dense thickets of the night forest, before the commander of the Black Dragon Knights and his apprentice. This surprised both knights greatly, causing them to freeze in amazement. After some time, Duke Louis, Charlotte of Brabant, Nadia Cardenas, and her sister Cordelia gathered in the imperial palace to chat and discuss pressing matters. Cordelia Cardenas addressed the guests and said that fate had once again brought all four of us together. It was a wonderful gift, one that should be treasured and appreciated. The protagonist didn't lose her composure and, to avoid being recognized by Cordelia Cardenas, put on her mask and even tried to disguise her voice. The young countess realized she had nothing left to lose in the current situation, so she carried herself cheerfully and confidently. Charlotte Brabant had managed to don her mask in the forest so that no one would recognize her. This somewhat embarrassed the fourth princess of the empire, but the main character justified it by saying that she didn't want to embarrass anyone in the emperor's palace with her unattractive face. A few minutes later, Princess Cordelia, who had been searching for her sister in the forest, appeared and suggested that everyone present go to the palace to rest, clean their wounds, and discuss the situation. Duke Louis gladly accepted this offer, for he was very fond of Cordelia Cardenas. The first princess of the empire once again thanked Cadet Tati for saving her sister from an assassin in Duke Louis's palace, and said that the imperial family wanted to reward the young man for his bravery. The main character, in order not to attract undue attention from the imperial family, thanked the princess and said that she did not deserve any rewards because she was simply fulfilling her knightly duty. Cordelia Cardenas smiled at the young cadet and said that his modesty made her consider the young man a true knight, without fear or reproach. The empire's first princess thought for a moment, smiled mysteriously, and said that the imperial family must repay its debt to maintain its honor and prestige. Therefore, the young knight would have to accept an offer he couldn't refuse. After this, Cordelia Cardenas officially announced that she would grant Cadet Toti the title of Knight of the Imperial Guard. These words greatly surprised not only the protagonist, but also Duke Louis. The first princess looked closely at the young cadet and said that he should join the Order of Scarlet, which she led. The protagonist looks at Cordelia Cardenas in surprise. The girl didn't expect such a high reward, but now she'll have to serve under the first princess. This is a disaster, as it disrupts all the young countess's plans. Duke Louis is not thrilled with Cordelia Cardenas's proposal. The aristocrat doesn't want to lose one of the finest fighters in his knightly order. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights asked the first princess what all this meant. The protagonist noticed a hint of anger and disappointment in Duke Louis's voice. Cordelia Cardenas listened attentively to the aristocrat and smiled meaningfully. The princess continued to sip her tea calmly. She said she simply wanted to accelerate Cadet Tati's career as a reward for the services he had rendered to the imperial family. After these words from Cordelia Cardenas, a noticeable spark of hostility erupted between her and Duke Louis. The first princess said that Cadet Tati's talent would be better developed in her knightly order than in the Duke's. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights disagreed. Lady Cordelia is the first princess of the empire, so she can afford such liberties and whims. True, after the sudden death of her mother and the emperor's marriage to Queen Herman, the first princess's position weakened somewhat, but she remains the heir to the imperial throne and wields considerable influence in aristocratic circles. Duke Herman increased his power and authority when he succeeded in marrying his daughter to the emperor after the sudden death of the first empress. When the situation in the imperial palace took a turn for the worse for the first princess after the arrival of the new empress, Lady Cordelia created her own knightly order, called Scarlet. This will help the princess regain her former strength. The protagonist understands why the empire's first princess has decided to recruit her into her knightly order. This will strengthen the princess's ranks, but the young countess must not agree to this, lest she reveal her secret and bring her plans to fruition. Lady Cordelia said that Cadet Tati would be awarded a baronetcy for his services to the imperial family. The main character's head spun at this news. She realized that the first princess was trying to win her favor with generous gifts. Duke Louis listened carefully to Lady Cordelia and said that Cadet Tati was his personal student and a very important member of the Order of the Black Dragon Knights, so he would remain serving in his squad. The main character's commander made his position on the matter clear and asked the first princess not to return to this topic again if she did not want to quarrel with Duke Louis. But Lady Cordelia persists. The Emperor's daughter said that in her unit, Cadet Tati will receive the very best, and his career will rise rapidly. Suddenly, the main character intervened in the conversation of the influential aristocrats. The girl knelt before the first princess and thanked her for her generous offer. Afterward, the young countess said she wished to remain with her master. The main character added that she will never forget Lady Cordelia's generous offer and will always be grateful to her for it. These words slightly confused the Empire's first princess. The aristocrat, unaccustomed to being refused, asked the cadet why he refused her generous offer. The protagonist replied that the code of chivalry presupposes loyalty to one's lord. Cadet Tati had already sworn allegiance to Duke Louis, so he could not betray his oath. A tense silence fell over the room after the young countess's words. Lady Cordelia was puzzled by the young knight's response. Her sister was delighted with the young man, and Duke Louis grew even more attached to his personal apprentice in gratitude for his loyalty. The protagonist understands that a critical moment has arrived in her life, one that will determine her entire future. If something goes wrong, the girl will face dire consequences. Charlotte Bravant, at this critical moment, remembered her sister's knightly fiancé, Ethan, who, at the end of the original novel, had done exactly what she had now done to preserve his knightly honor. The main character anxiously awaits the response of the Empire's first princess. The girl believes that the Emperor's daughter should respect the knightly code of honor. Lady Cordelia is silent. She is very surprised by the behavior of Cadet Toddy, who seems to have stepped out of the pages of a chivalric romance. But the main character continues to stubbornly insist on her own, showing this with her posture and silence. The first princess of the Empire finally collected her thoughts and asked Cadet Toddy to raise his head and rise from his knees. The aristocrat believed that, given the current situation, the young knight's request should be granted. Duke Louis was pleased with his personal student, but he remained true to himself even in this situation, saying that Cadet Toddy was nothing but trouble, despite his exploits. The conversation came to an end. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights politely bid the princesses farewell and said it was time for him to leave. Lady Cordelia apologized for her rudeness and said that Duke Louis should understand her desire to accept Cadet Toddy, who is a fine knight, into his knightly order. The first princess added that persistent rumors circulated among the nobility that the emperor had little time to live. Lady Cordelia dreamed of Duke Louis abandoning his political neutrality and switching sides. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights listened carefully to the first princess of the empire and replied that he was, first and foremost, a knight and did not want to take sides in dirty political games. After this, the noble duke left Lady Cordelia alone with her thoughts and plans. Lady Cordelia said nothing to the knight's commander. She understood that luck was not on her side for now. Duke Louis stepped out into the corridor and stopped after a few steps, clutching his head in his hand. The aristocrat thought that everyone in this palace wanted something from him. He was tired of it and wanted peace. Suddenly, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights was confronted by his personal apprentice. The duke hadn't expected to see the young countess here at this hour. The main character is in a great mood. She immediately starts talking about how busy the day has been. Duke Louis remains silent and stares intently at his faithful student. The aristocrat is very pleased with his cadet's behavior, who has not been tempted by generous gifts and has demonstrated his loyalty. A few minutes later, the commander told the protagonist that they were returning to the Order of the Black Dragon immediately. Circumstances and urgent matters demanded it. Without further ado, the knights headed home. Several days have passed. The action takes place at the Bravant family estate. Charlotte Bravant's older sister received a letter from her. In her message, the main character writes that she's doing well and misses her sister very much. Charlotte experiences various unexpected and funny situations in her new place, but this only makes her feel better and happier. Grace Bravant's servant stands next to her. He looks at his mistress, who is reading a letter from her sister. The butler inquired if the message contained good news. The main character's sister finished reading the letter and looked at her faithful servant, who was now showing his concern for his mistress. The countess was quite pleased with the letter's contents and showed it with her whole demeanor. Lady Grace Bravant said her sister was having a wonderful time in the south of the empire. A servant replied that it was impossible not to like Lady Charlotte. Therefore, she makes wonderful connections with new people, wherever she is. After this, the butler said that the young countess's coming of age was approaching, so she should return to her family estate quickly to avoid missing her celebration. Lady Grace should also inform her sister of her engagement to Duke Herman. The main character's sister listened attentively to her faithful servant and pondered his words. The Countess said it was too early to inform Lady Charlotte of her sister's engagement. The situation had not yet been finalized. Lady Grace added that she was delaying her engagement to Duke Herman as long as possible, but because of her friendship with Lady Cordelia, the pressure on the Brabant family was increasing daily. The Empire's first princess had lost her position at her father's court, and she was no longer favored. Her friends were suffering because of this. Duke Herman is the Emperor's father-in-law. He seeks to weaken Lady Cordelia at any cost and place his grandson, Prince Adrian, on the throne. The cunning and wily aristocrat wants to marry Lady Grace Brabant to further strengthen his political position because the Brabant family has always provided strong support to the first princess of the empire. Even though Grace Brabant was engaged to the knight Ethan, she had to accept Duke Herman's proposal because he threatened to destroy her world and all her loved ones. The main character's sister told her faithful butler that she very much hoped that Charlotte would never find out about these dirty deeds and would live in peace and quiet. The Countess wants her younger sister to be happy and unaware of all these unpleasant affairs. Therefore, she wants to delay Charlotte Brabant's return home. Summer has arrived. Summer training has begun at the Order of the Black Dragon. This has taken its toll on the new recruits, who are experiencing increased physical strain and a more rigorous training schedule. The main character is very tired and curses the day she decided to join the knightly order. Typically, only newcomers and junior officers participate in the Summer Knights training camp, but this year, things will be different. Senior officers will also take part in the summer training camp and will also compete during training sparring between knights. It so happens that Duke Louis has many pressing matters at the moment, so he's not participating in the knights training. The main character will be honing her skills with Idris Klein. She's very happy about this. The Black Dragon Knight's deputy commander said that the key to successful training was a bare torso, as clothing wouldn't restrict the knight's movements. These words puzzled Cadet Toddy. Idris Klein knows the young countess's situation. She can't undress in front of the other knights because she's a girl. The second-in-command said their training would be in the evening, and in the meantime, she could wash herself in his tent. The knight leaned towards the main character and whispered in her ear that he would not let anyone near his tent while the girl was swimming there. The main character was delighted to have the opportunity to swim peacefully without being disturbed. She thanked her commander for this opportunity. The young countess said she'd quickly run for some clean clothes and would soon return to bathe in Idris Klein's private tent. But suddenly, something completely unexpected happened. The protagonist heard a familiar voice. She turned and saw Duke Louis, who had unexpectedly appeared at the knight's training camp and was practicing fencing. The Duke got momentarily carried away by sparring with his partner and misjudged his strength. He apologized to the knight and promised it wouldn't happen again. The aristocrat would definitely work on the mistake he'd just made. The young countess stares at Duke Louis, unable to understand why he'd decided to attend the training camp. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights had informed all the knights in advance that he wouldn't be there this year because he was very busy. The main character felt the incredible inner strength of Duke Louis, which can only be revealed if a person has survived great trials and managed to pass them with dignity. In this world, all knights who have mastered their inner natural power, akin to magical abilities, are called swordmasters. To reach this high level, a warrior must train extensively, not only physically, but also mentally. Currently, only one person in the Cardenas Empire has achieved such a high level and earned the right to be called a swordmaster. This person's name is Raphael Astrid Ludovic. At this moment, this great warrior stands before the main character. He is her personal trainer and intends to make her the Empire's finest knight, if she can endure it all. The commander approached his young cadet and kindly asked him if he was frightened by Duke Louis's unexpected appearance on the training field. The protagonist replied that she wasn't frightened at all and was very glad to see her mentor there. Duke Louis smiled mysteriously and said he'd just made a mistake during a sparring session. He'd like to correct it with the help of his young cadet after some practice. The commander sent his deputy to other matters. Now, Duke Louis wants to train with his cadet. The protagonist didn't expect this turn of events. Idris Klein was also a little upset that his plans had been disrupted by his commander's unexpected appearance on the training field, but it couldn't be helped. Orders were orders. Suddenly, the Black Dragon Knight's deputy commander decided to go against his wishes. He said he could handle Cadet Toddy's training perfectly well himself, but Duke Lewis replied that he was his personal apprentice and obligated to train him personally. The aristocrat added that this would only be better for his cadet, as he would be taking fencing lessons from the Empire's only master swordsman. The protagonist is shocked by this altercation between the knights, who are also close friends. The quarrel was the fault of the young countess, who evokes affection in both men. The main character decided to immediately intervene in this pointless and harmful dispute between the aristocrats. She said she really wanted to learn something from Duke Lewis. After that, the problem resolved itself. The young countess and the commander of the Black Dragon Knights went to the Duke's tent to prepare for the upcoming training. The young woman expressed a desire to begin immediately. Meanwhile, Duke Lewis is overcome with emotional torment. The aristocrat has begun to become attached to his cadet, and he doesn't like it. He doesn't want to lose his inner freedom. Cadet Toddy noticed his commander's embarrassment. He smiled, finding it mildly amusing, but Duke Louis said he was irritated by his students' taunts. At the same time, the commander of the Black Dragon Knights noticed that his deputy had somehow taken a keen interest in Cadet Toddy. This didn't sound like Idris Klein. Duke Lewis has come to the final conclusion that the arrival of the enigmatic and obnoxious Cadet Toti has brought about radical changes in his knightly order and his entire customary way of life, and no one knows whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. The main character watches her commander closely and does not understand why he brought her to his field tent if he does not intend to train with her now. Meanwhile, Duke Louis decided to take off his stale shirt to change. He didn't know it was Countess Bravant standing before him, so he wasn't bothered. The girl quickly closed her eyes so as not to see her commander's bare torso. She asked why the Duke had just undressed in front of her. The leader of the Black Dragon Knights replied that he had sweated profusely during the previous sparring session and simply wanted to take a bath. Afterwards, Duke Louis took a bath and told Cadet Toddy to stand quietly nearby and not disturb him. The young countess doesn't dare contradict her superior. She stands to the side, secretly spying on Duke Louis. She's deeply embarrassed, but also consumed by curiosity. The heroine looked at her bathing commander and noticed something very strange. The girl saw many deep scars on the Duke's back, which had healed but left an indelible mark. The young countess secretly examines the scars on her commander's back and tries to understand how they appeared there. The girl thought for a moment and didn't hesitate to ask Duke Louis where he got such deep scars on his back, which looked like marks of excruciating torture. The knight's commander replied that he didn't understand why the cadet was asking him about it. The protagonist became even more confused after this answer. She wondered if these scars were somehow connected to the magical power her commander had managed to master. The girl asked the Duke if his scars hurt. The aristocrat smiled and said that the scars had long since healed and didn't hurt at all. Therefore, the cadet had nothing to worry about. But the young countess clarified that this wasn't what she meant. She was asking about the emotional wounds associated with these scars and the memories they evoked in Duke Louis. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights didn't respond. He merely waved his hand and motioned for his cadet to come closer. This surprised the girl greatly, and she became wary. The heroine overcame her embarrassment and fear. She followed her commander's orders and approached him, but Duke Louis laughed and flicked the young countess on the forehead. Afterward, he said that the cadet should mind his own business. A powerful blow to the girl's forehead caused her to lose her balance, slip, and feel herself falling forward. She realized something terrible was about to happen. This unexpected fall ended with the heroine landing in her commander's arms, falling into the bathtub he was bathing in. Duke Louis froze in surprise, but was not the least bit embarrassed. The young countess immediately collected herself and confessed to her master that she had just nearly died of fright. She must quickly get out of the bath and leave Duke Louis alone. The girl quickly rose to her feet, but she was still in the bathtub. The aristocrat laughed and said he could wash himself. He didn't need any help with that. These words deeply embarrassed the protagonist. She realized the Duke was mocking her. Charlotte Bravant hurried out of her commander's tent, declaring that she urgently needed a change of clothes. The protagonist couldn't understand how she had ended up in such a precarious situation. Meanwhile, Duke Louis sits in his bath, rubbing his forehead in confusion. The aristocrat is trying to understand the conflicting emotions he's just experienced after this amusing incident, and he can't quite collect his thoughts. The next day arrived. The Knights of the Black Dragon Order gathered on the training field to demonstrate and hone their military skills. The main character is in a dejected mood after yesterday's incident in Duke Lewis's tent. She remained awake all night due to anxiety. But today, she faces a difficult test, so the young countess has no time for idle worries. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to Cadet Toddy. She turned around and saw that the Order's deputy commander, Idris Klein, was calling her. The aristocrat said the young countess should follow him because training was about to begin. These words surprised the girl, as she was supposed to train with Duke Lewis today. Idris Klein said the commander had urgent business, so the Duke would be unable to train Cadet Toddy today. The deputy commander also noted that this news greatly pleased the main character. The aristocrat began selecting blades suitable for the training session. While doing so, he informed the girl that he had good news that might lift the cadet's spirits. Idris Klein said that Knight Ethan will return to the Order of the Black Dragon earlier than expected. Grace Bravant's fiancé will be here tomorrow. The young countess was overjoyed by this wonderful news. She had already thought she wouldn't be able to meet the Knight Ethan for a long time, but fate was kind to the main character. Charlotte Bravant will speak with Knight Ethan immediately tomorrow and persuade him to fight for his love. Grace Bravant must break her engagement to Duke Herman and marry Knight Ethan. This will reverse the fatal scenario of the original story, and everyone will live happily ever after. Meanwhile, Idris Klein found a suitable blade for training and asked the girl if she was ready to begin the training process immediately. The main character told the deputy commander that she was always ready to train, but tomorrow she would meet with the Knight Ethan. After that, the young countess would happily return to her family estate. These words made Idris Klein feel a little sad. He looked regretfully at the blade he held in his hands. The knight was deeply saddened that the young countess would leave him and the Order of the Black Dragon. The aristocrat thought for a moment and decided to give the girl some helpful advice. Idris Klein said that Cadet Toddy would be best served escaping from the Order of the Black Dragon while he was still in training camp. It would be very difficult to escape from the Duke's estate. The girl was struck by these words. The deputy commander added that the young countess need not fear that the Duke would punish him for his oversight. Everything would surely be sorted out somehow. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights will undoubtedly be extremely angry. He'll send hundreds of his subordinates after the fugitive to find her. Duke Lewis will also not allow anyone to leave his domain for a whole month to achieve his goal of capturing Cadet Toddy at any cost. The protagonist is shocked by this information. Idris Klein saw that the young countess was very upset by his words. The aristocrat smiled knowingly and said that he had just played a little joke on the gullible girl. The Black Dragon Knight's deputy commander added that tomorrow, the main character's escape would be very simple. Idris Klein would issue the girl a pass that would allow her to legally leave the training camp. That's all there is to it. Charlotte Bravant looks with respect and gratitude at the noble knight who is providing her with great assistance in realizing her plans. She is a little perplexed, unable to understand why Idris Klein cares so much about her. When the main character asked her commander why he was acting this way, Idris Klein stared at the girl and said it was simply a whim and nothing more. But the noble knight's gaze revealed that he was secretly in love with the young countess. Charlotte Bravant looks into the eyes of her interlocutor and only intuitively begins to understand that the second-in-command has romantic feelings for her. That was the end of the sad conversation. Idris Klein smiled and said that today would be his last training session with Cadet Toddy, so he wanted to show his student a useful technique that would definitely come in handy. The protagonist happily agreed to this offer. The training with Idris Klein was grueling and difficult, as the main character had to learn so much in a short period of time. Charlotte Bravant is now in the dining room about to have dinner. She can barely stand due to fatigue. The protagonist sat down at the table and realized that every muscle in her body would ache tomorrow. Idris Klein wasted no time training his student. He taught her a lot, but it was a difficult process. Tomorrow, the young countess will need renewed strength, so she must eat well today to replenish her energy. The girl is inspired by the fact that tomorrow will be her long-awaited meeting with the knight Ethan. Suddenly, the main character heard a familiar voice next to her. The young countess looked around and realized she had managed to sit at the communal dining table next to Duke Lewis, who was also dining there. Across from Cadet Toddy sits the personal secretary of the Black Dragon Knight's commander. He stares at the main character, unable to understand why she seems so embarrassed in Duke Lewis's presence. The young countess collected her thoughts, wished the chief bon appetit, and thought that she needed to quickly finish her dinner and get away from here as far as possible before anything happened. Duke Lewis stares intently at Cadet Toddy. The knight, too, feels a little uneasy after yesterday's awkward incident in his personal tent. The main character felt the commander watching her closely. This infuriated her, and she expressed her indignation about it, as she wanted to eat in peace and rest after a difficult day of training. The Black Dragon Knight commander smiled meaningfully and did not scold his student for his lack of restraint. Suddenly, everything around shook, and an unexpected landslide occurred. This phenomenon is quite common in this mountainous region. The main character didn't expect such a turn of events. Unaccustomed to such natural disasters, the girl began to panic, but Duke Lewis maintained his composure in the critical situation. The young countess was frightened and hid under the table. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights remained standing, fully erect. He waited for the landslide to end and for everything to calm down. Duke Lewis hurried outside to assess the situation following the landslide. The commander met his deputy, and they concluded that the disaster had cut off all access routes out of the valley. Idris Klein told Duke Lewis that no one would be able to reach the training camp for at least a week. This news greatly upset the commander, as he was expecting the arrival of the knights he had sent to scout the western borders of the empire the following day. Moreover, the emperor may once again send the Black Dragon Knights on an expedition to the western part of the empire. Duke Lewis does not want to feel powerless in this situation. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights ordered his subordinates to begin clearing the rubble immediately. The new recruits immediately set to work carrying out this timely order, despite being extremely tired after a rigorous day of training. Duke Lewis addressed his knights to encourage them. The commander said that clearing the rubble would be the best physical exercise imaginable. The main character was very tired today, but she began to work with double diligence when she realized that the sudden blockage that cut off all routes could prevent her from meeting with the knight Ethan tomorrow. The young countess works tirelessly. She wants to clear the cursed rubble as quickly as possible. Otherwise, all her plans will fall apart, and her sister will suffer greatly, marrying the treacherous Duke Herman. Suddenly, the main character heard someone nearby discussing the knight Ethan. The conversation caught her interest, and she began to listen intently. The knights who had been working alongside Cadet Toddy grew tired of clearing the rubble and abandoned their tools. They blamed Knight Ethan for everything, saying it was because of his visit tomorrow that the soldiers were having to work so hard. The protagonist overheard one of the knights call Ethan a sycophant who always tries to please Duke Lewis, so the commander forced the soldiers to strain their backs and calluses their hands. The gossip also mentioned that Grace Brevant had fallen in love with the knight Ethan, who is a commoner by birth. According to the soldier, the countess acted very rashly. The main character listens to all this and cannot believe her ears. The overly talkative gossip continues to throw mud at the sister of Cadet Toddy, who is already beginning to boil with righteous anger. Listening to all this idle gossip, the young countess grew tired of listening to this insulting nonsense and decided to put an end to it. She slammed her pickaxe into the ground with all her might next to the knight who dared to spread gossip about Grace Brevant and her lover. The main character glared at the cowardly officer and told him to take his words back immediately. Otherwise, he would be punished for his loose tongue. The gossip monger didn't expect this turn of events. He became a little embarrassed and asked what was happening to Cadet Toddy. This cowardly officer quickly collected his thoughts and said that a cadet who was below him in rank had no right to tell him what to do. The enraged girl rightly pointed out that an officer shouldn't spread gossip. It was against the knightly code of honor. Besides, this cowardly gossip wasn't fit to hold a candle to the noble knight Ethan. The insolent officer decided to go on the offensive. He began taunting the knight Ethan and the main character, who was protecting him. The gossip smiled and told Cadet Toddy that he was probably only protecting knight Ethan because he had promised him his protection. After this, the impudent man dared to nudge the young countess, who remained completely calm. The girl was waiting for the right moment to deal with the insolent officer, who was getting too carried away. The protagonist told the officer she was giving him her final warning. If the despicable gossip didn't apologize immediately, he would face severe punishment. But the officer was too self-assured and had very little understanding of Cadet Toddy's talents to simply back down and apologize. The insolent man didn't back down and dared to threaten the young countess again. At that moment, the girl's patience finally snapped. She assumed a fighting stance and prepared to draw her blade to punish the slanderer. Suddenly, Duke Louis intervened in the tense situation at a critical moment. The nobleman saw that his knights had quarreled and were ready to engage in immediate combat, so he decided to stop them. The Black Dragon Knight commander angrily asked his subordinates what was going on here and why they were so ready to attack each other. This inappropriate behavior would certainly be punished. All the officers present immediately bowed to their commander and saluted him. Afterward, they greeted Duke Louis, as befits the knightly code. The main character didn't bow her head to the commander. She stood her ground and looked Duke Louis straight in the eye. The aristocrat wasn't fazed. He asked Cadet Toddy what he had just been about to do. The young countess now deeply regrets having presented herself in an unfavorable light to her commander, but she decided to tell the truth and admitted that she had intended to draw her blade to fight the officer. Meanwhile, the brazen gossip and his comrade continue to stand in a crouched position before their commander. They secretly mock the main character, who is now forced to justify her breach of discipline to Duke Louis. The commander of the Black Dragon Knights was always quick to punish. He didn't bother to sort out who was right and who was wrong in this situation. The aristocrat dismissed the officers and informed them that Cadet Toddy would clear away all the remaining rubble himself. This cruel punishment left the unfortunate girl stunned. The main character didn't have time to say anything in her defense. Duke Louis simply looked at his cadet with such a cold and meaningful gaze that it was best not to argue with him at all. The young countess fell silent mid-sentence. She had never seen the commander look at her with such disdain and coldness. This greatly surprised the protagonist. Duke Louis said no more. The aristocrat gave his stern orders to Cadet Toddy and hurried away, lest his mercy and pity for the young man he liked backfire. This is because discipline in a knightly corps must be ironclad. The main character didn't argue with the commander. She bowed her head obediently and said she would carry out the master's orders he had just given. When the commander left, Cadet Toddy returned to clearing the rubble. Meanwhile, the main character was very upset because she felt Duke Louis had been unfair to her. After a few minutes of hard work, the girl decided to take a break. The young countess couldn't understand why she had to be the only one clearing the rubble, while all the other knights were resting or doing other things. The sad cadet sat down on the ground and reflected on how he had never abused his position in society. He also never asked for help from powerful people in this world, and had dealt with all the difficulties he had encountered in his life on his own. A brave and noble girl simply wanted to defend the honor of her sister and her lover. But for this, she was ridiculed and treated unfairly, forced to bear the brunt of those truly at fault. The young countess now reflected on how she was merely a fragile girl who, by the will of fate, had found herself in the company of rude and ruthless men who didn't know who she truly was. This was an unusual situation that required unusual decisions and actions. At that moment, the girl felt utterly devastated and abandoned. The young countess desperately wanted to give vent to her feelings and burst into tears. The main character sits on the ground and reflects on the current situation. She also desperately wants to know if she's doing the right thing to make all her plans come true. Charlotte Brabant clutched her head in her hands and loudly ordered herself not to fall apart and to pull herself together. The young countess must, no matter what, save her sister, who could ruin herself by marrying Duke Herman. The main character calmed down a bit and managed to collect her thoughts. Suddenly, the girl realized that she could rid herself of all her problems today thanks to one smart move she could make. The girl considered not having to clear the rubble all night. She could simply make her way through to the other side and meet Knight Ethan there tomorrow. Especially since unexpected problems could arise tomorrow. Grace Brabant's boyfriend occupies a higher rank than the cadet. Therefore, the main character won't be able to see him right away at the training camp. The young countess decided not to delay any longer. She threw down her pickaxe, which she was growing tired of. Then she began to climb up the rubble, blocking her path to Knight Ethan. When the main character climbed the first stone ledge, she immediately forgot all the sorrows that had just overwhelmed her. Now, Cadet Toddy has a new goal that inspires him. Meanwhile, Duke Louis arrived at the rubble heap to check on his cadet's progress. But the commander was disappointed, as he didn't find the young knight there. Unable to find his cadet near the rubble, Duke Louis decided to return to his private tent to change clothes and reflect on the situation. An aide informed the commander that unpleasant rumors had spread throughout the camp that Duke Louis was singling out Cadet Toddy among the other knights. The assistant asked the gentleman to be more careful in future with the mysterious cadet, who had never fully revealed his true identity. He could be an Imperial spy. The commander listened attentively to his secretary and said that, while still near the rubble, he had decided to search for the missing cadet personally in order to find answers to all the unresolved questions. Meanwhile, the main character managed to overcome the rockfall and find the knight Ethan's camp in the night forest. The girl is very close to her goal. The young countess watches Knight Ethan's camp from a hidden spot in the nearby bushes. She's thrilled she didn't have to wander the forest until morning, and she quickly completed her task. Now, the main character is thinking about what to do next. She guessed that the knight Ethan probably wouldn't be sitting idle in his camp. He'd probably gone on a reconnaissance mission. Cadet Toddy is very worried about how Knight Ethan will greet him. He doesn't know whether the knight will scold him or treat him kindly and warmly. Suddenly, Charlotte Brevant heard a familiar voice behind her, ordering her to remain where she was. The man who snuck up behind the main character put his blade to her neck and asked who she was and what she was doing there at such a late hour. The young countess was right in her suspicions. Knight Ethan didn't sit idle in his camp. He went on a reconnaissance mission and discovered Cadet Toddy near his camp. Charlotte Brevant stands with a blade to her throat. At first, she was frightened, but after a few seconds, she collected her thoughts and recognized the voice of the man threatening her. But Grace Brevant's fiancé hadn't yet recognized his bride's sister. He ordered the young countess to raise her hands and slowly turn toward him for an initial inspection. After this, Knight Ethan sternly told the protagonist that she mustn't do anything stupid. Otherwise, she would surely pay for it with her life. When Grace Brevant's fiancé finally got a good look at his captive's face, he was surprised, horrified, and delighted all at once. Standing before the knight was the sister of his beloved. At first, the knight simply couldn't believe it. The main character stares at the knight and also can't believe she's finally able to meet him. It took a lot of effort. Knight Ethan came to his senses and immediately dropped the blade he had been threatening the young countess with. After that, the officer of the Order of the Black Dragon ran as fast as he could toward the girl to embrace her. Ethan approached Charlotte Brevant and stroked her face. The knight began asking the girl how she had ended up there, looking so unusual, with her new hairstyle and men's clothing. The young countess still couldn't believe her good fortune that she had finally managed to find a way to see her sister's fiancé. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes. The noble knight doesn't think about himself. His primary concern now is the well-being of Charlotte Brevant, whom he had greatly frightened with his threats. Ethan hastened to apologize to the young countess for his oversight. At that moment, the protagonist gave vent to the emotions that had been building up within her for a long time, ever since she joined the knightly Order of the Black Dragon. Charlotte Brevant burst into tears and told Ethan that she had been so looking forward to meeting him. The noble knight hugged the young countess tightly, asked her to wipe away her tears, and said that now everything would always be in perfect order, no matter what happened in the future.